Chapter 896, Skyrocketing Points. Chapter 896, Skyrocketing Points. The secret pavilion had another name for the battle tower, the Tower of Guidance. From what Kong Howren shared, the battle tower could help a player grow all the way up to grasping a domain. Previously, Shifeng only partly believed these words. Now, however, he no longer doubted them. In order to be considered as having reached the refinement realm, one needed to have excellent control over their own body and be able to flexibly and naturally vary the amount of strength their body exerted. The flowing water realm required one to perceive and observe the opponents. One had to be able to distinguish their opponent's thoughts and carry out appropriate responses in advance by observing the opponent's minute movements. To put it simply, one needed to be able to react before their opponents even acted. The Void Realm demanded a certain amount of control over one's surroundings. Instead of merely judging the environment through vision alone, one needed to push their five senses to the very limits and rely on these enhanced senses to determine all movements occurring in the background. The goal of the Battle Tower's first floor was to have players learn how to control themselves, using the pressure of facing a large number of lions to learn how to adapt nimbly to sudden changes. The second floor was meant to improve a player's instantaneous observation powers and snap judgment. The third floor served to improve a player's perception and judgment of distance. Accurately judging distance was a challenging task. However, as long as one managed to achieve this, they would be considered to have officially entered the flowing water realm. Shifeng had to admit that the guidance provided by the battle tower was very on point. It was no wonder that super guilds could nurture such a large number of top-tier experts. The Flame Falcons and Flame Eagle hovering in the sky had no intention of giving Shifeng too much time. Letting out screeches that echoed throughout the entire valley, the fiery birds spat out scorching flames in Shifeng's direction in unison. It will be difficult for him to clear the third floor. Among those present inside the battle fortress were quite a few people whose progress stalled on the third floor. Hence, they were very clear on how difficult this floor was. Not only would one receive flame attacks from all directions, but the valley floor would also change at random. Places that were originally safe zones could turn into a danger zone in the next second. One constantly needed to pay attention to their footing while on this floor. Moreover, there were no objects in the area that could serve to block the flame attacks of the monsters. One could just imagine the difficulty of the third floor. Not to mention attacking the flying monsters, the majority of the players who reached this floor would generally fail to cope properly, and ultimately died to either the scorching ground or the flame attacks. What is he trying to do? Everyone suddenly noticed that, despite seeing the 10 streaks of flames coming at him, Shifeng actually chose to remain standing still. Just as the flames were about to devour Shifeng, the swordsman suddenly strode forward, his body leaving behind numerous afterimages as he moved about the small platform he was on. In the next moment, one streak of flames engulfed the afterimages Shifeng left behind. After all 10 were gone, Shifeng was standing back in his original position completely unscathed. How is this possible? Cold Autumn was momentarily stupefied. Although he had yet to reach the third floor himself, it was obvious to him that were he the one going up against these flame attacks, aside from running and dodging, he would have no other method to retain his life. The distance the flame attacks were launched from was simply too short. He would have absolutely no way to avoid that many attacks in the limited maneuvering space available. As for blocking the flame attacks with his weapon, that would be utterly impossible. He would need a complete set of mysterious iron equipment at the very least to avoid taking any damage from blocking the attacks of the Flame Falcons. Blocking the attacks of the Flame Eagle would require him to be fully geared in secret silver equipment at the minimum. However, the system armed them with only a set of bronze equipment in the battle tower. Trying to defend against the flame attacks would be suicidal. Now, even while standing in that small area, Shifeng had actually managed to avoid all the flame attacks. It was as if these flames were intentionally circling his body. This is impossible. There must be something wrong with the system. How can he dodge all those attacks in time at such a close distance? The players spectating Shifeng had long since gone into an uproar. Almost all of them had shouted the same thing. No matter how they wrapped their minds around it, dodging so many attacks from such a close distance was not feasible. The only possibility was that an error had occurred with the system. Otherwise, how were they supposed to explain the earlier scene? Wen Hua, however, did not feel any surprise at the outcome of that onslaught. Everyone was basing their judgments only on the distance the flames were coming from. However, they had forgotten that they were living in a three-dimensional world. Aside from horizontal and vertical distance, one also should not forget depth. On the screen, it might seem as if all 10 flame attacks came over similar distances. But in reality, the distance each attack needed to travel was different. As all 10 attacks were launched simultaneously, the times at which the attacks reached Shifeng would differ slightly. Meanwhile, Shifeng had utilized the small time difference in the arrival of the attacks to systematically evade them one after another. The one part about this scene that annoyed Wen Hua, however, was that she had not noticed the slightest bit of haste or anxiety in Shifeng's movements. The man had casually dodged the attacks as if he was just taking a leisurely stroll, his actions containing no excess movement whatsoever. Wen Hua even felt a shiver go down her back when she looked at how smooth and natural his movements were. The numerous surprised gasps coming from the spectators immediately attracted the attention of those resting in the main hall, every one of them looking at these several spectators in confusion. What's up with them? Aren't they just spectating a battle? Is there a need to go so crazy over it? This curiosity now tempted many more people who were reluctant to part with their points. Such a commotion had never occurred before, even when the upper echelons of their guilds fought in the battle tower. What exactly was going on inside the battle tower? Just as everyone was hesitating over whether or not to spectate Shifeng's battle, a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious red-black martial arts robes entered the hall. With quick steps, this middle-aged man walked up to the portal of the battle tower. After finding a quiet place to sit in, the man then chose to spectate Shifeng's battle. Damn! This is madness. This is simply madness. Why has Elder Yuan come over as well? Isn't this a training system meant to nurture youths with potential? He couldn't be here too. All the bystanders suddenly thought of a possibility when they looked at Yuan Taishin quietly sitting down and calling out his system interface. However, none of them could accept this shocking thought of theirs. Those who had still been hesitating immediately looked for seats and chose to spectate Shifeng's battle. Instantly, the number of people spectating Shifeng increased to 63. Those who lacked the points to spectate were all stupefied by this scene. Even when the upper echelon of the secret pavilion came to challenge the battle tower, the number of spectators would be around this number, at most. Moreover, today was a day when many people were busy with their own matters and had not come to participate in the training system. Otherwise, the number of spectators right now would definitely rise even higher. Just who is Brother Shifeng? The shock Kong Haoran was feeling right now at this sight was many times more intense than what he felt when he had faced off against an army of over 100,000 elite players. I would be set for life if I could have this many people spectating my battle. Hua Zhengyang could not close his mouth as he saw this scene. Just how many battle points could he earn if he had this many people spectating his battle as well? Even if he fought against a refinement realm expert every day, those points could last him for 2 whole months. On the 3rd floor of the battle tower, Shifeng repeatedly dodged the flame attacks sent at him. Even when the terrain changed, he managed to reach a safe zone immediately. Occasionally, he would also attack with a flying dart. Although the damage he caused was low, only minus 500 points or so, none of the monsters in the battle tower had the battle recovery ability. Hence, he could slowly but surely wear down these monsters. Following which, one Flame Falcon's HP continuously decreased. The battle had already fallen under Shifeng's complete control. That's enough experimentation. It's about time things ended. He then threw out the last dart that took away the final strand of HP of a Flame Falcon. As a result of one Flame Falcon dying, the number of attacks Shifeng had to face at a single time decreased from 10 to 9, making dodging the attacks much easier for him. With no suspense whatsoever, he whittled down the remaining Flame Falcons and Flame Eagle, once again easily clearing a floor. Only, as Shifeng was not playing a ranged class, his attacks were a lot less effective compared to those of ranged classes. Hence, he had not managed to break the record clear time for the 3rd floor. Even so, he still stupefied all his spectators. The reason for everyone's shock was because Shifeng's clear time for the third floor was only marginally slower than the current record holder's. If his ranged weapon had been slightly better and he had learned a few more good skills, he could have easily broken the record. Following which, Shifeng entered the fourth floor of the battle tower. This was also the highest floor the current batch of trainees had reached. Chapter 897, Silent Hell. Chapter 897, Silent Hell. This person is strong. It was worth spending all those points to spectate him. This is my first time seeing someone clear the third floor so easily. This shows that he has still not reached his limits. At this rate, he might even be able to clear the fourth floor and become the first person among this batch of trainees to reach the fifth floor. That's impossible. This is the fourth floor we are talking about. Even the top experts of our guild are still stuck there. Even if Shifeng is amazing, it is simply impossible for him to match up to the top experts of our guild. I guess you're right. Our guild's top experts all stand at the peak of God's domain. There are probably only a handful of youths who can surpass them. Just as the spectators were discussing Shifeng's battle, Shifeng himself set foot onto the fourth floor. Unlike the second and third floors, which had vile environments, the fourth floor was elegant and serene. Trees and shrubberies surrounded Shifeng. There was also a pristine lake nearby. Shifeng observed his surroundings, his expression turning slightly serious. Although his surroundings looked very peaceful, Shifeng could not ignore a sense of crisis in his mind. The worst part about this hunch was that he did not know what triggered it. Even though he was standing still and doing nothing, this sense of crisis was looming closer and closer. Could they be stealthed monsters? Shifeng thought of a possibility. Or to put it in another way, it was the only possibility. This sensation he was feeling right now was as if numerous top-tier assassin experts were staring at him. However, no matter how skilled and silent the assassin might be, as long as they were a player, Shifeng would more or less be able to find traces of them through sight and hearing, yet neither of these two senses of his had picked up anything. He discovered them so quickly. Wen Hua was somewhat surprised to see Shifeng's expression turning a little guarded. The fourth floor of the battle tower had another name to it, Silent Hell. It had a total of 8 elite-ranked Void Assassins and 1 chieftain-ranked Null Assassin. Void Assassin, Elite Rank. Level 30. HP 50 00050 000. Null Assassin, Chieftain Rank. Level 30. HP 200 000 200 000. Although their HPs were very low, these monsters had a special characteristic. They remained in a permanent state of nothingness. Their bodies existed in a completely different space, so one's senses of sight, hearing, and smell could not detect these monsters no matter what. Only when these monsters launched an attack would their real bodies manifest. However, they would appear for only a very short time, around 1 second at most. Aside from this brief period, attacks directed at these monsters would be completely ineffective. The difficulty of the fourth floor had left everyone who had managed to reach the fourth floor in this batch of trainees utterly helpless. Setting aside the fact that the attacks of the assassins were lightning fast, just the fact that the attacks were launched at such a close distance made dodging them nearly impossible. Or to put it in another way, it was simply impossible for someone with the attributes of an ordinary level 30 player to evade those attacks. Even if one managed to dodge those kinds of attacks, failing to counterattack in time would eventually lead to death from overexhaustion. Back when Wen Hua herself had reached the fourth floor for the first time, she had died completely unaware of what had happened. And even now, she was still stuck on this floor. Only the monster-like existences of the secret pavilion were able to contend against the assassins on this floor. So far, just a few people throughout the entire guild had managed to clear the fourth floor. I wonder just how far you will be able to go. A bright smile appeared on Wen Hua's face as she quietly observed the swordsman. She had a feeling that, if she could observe Shifeng clearing this floor, she might be able to break through that barrier that was preventing her from improving. Under Wen Hua's gaze, Shifeng started moving. Without hesitation, he dashed up to a nearby tree and placed his back against the large tree. This way, he no longer needed to pay attention to attacks coming from behind. He just needed to keep an eye out for attacks coming from 180 degrees in front of him. Damn, so you can do something like that as well? Everyone spectating this scene was stupefied. They had never thought to utilize the terrain in such a way. The effort an expert needed to expend to defend against attacks coming from just 180 degrees was many times less than attacks coming from all 360 degrees. With the energy saved, one could better perceive and concentrate as well. Moreover, dodging attacks would become much easier. However, as soon as Shifeng stood in front of the large tree, a silvery white dagger suddenly appeared before him, directly slashing at his neck. So fast. Surprised, Shifeng instinctively sidestepped. With the speed of the attack as well as the short distance it was launched from, if Shifeng had not responded instantly, he would have gotten struck without a doubt. Fortunately, he had already reached the Void Realm, so he could feel the movements in his surroundings. Although the appearance of the dagger was very sudden, the moment the weapon materialized, it would more or less generate some fluctuations in the air, which gave him sufficient warning and allowed him to carry out preventive measures. In the next moment, the snowy white dagger brushed past his neck and left a deep scar on the tree behind him. Close on the heels of that first attack, fluctuations appeared from 2 more places. Meanwhile, the position of these fluctuations came from the direction he had sidestepped to. Shifeng tightened his grip on his twin swords and hurriedly slashed at the locations the 2 fluctuations originated from. Peng! Peng! 2 crisp sounds echoed throughout the entire forest. The sparks generated were also extraordinarily eye-catching. Crap, isn't he too amazing? How did he manage to detect those attacks? The spectators' mouths all fell wide open when they saw the sparks flashing before Shifeng. As bystanders, they had a much clearer view of the situation than Shifeng. However, even after looking for a long time, they failed to detect anything peculiar about the locations he had attacked. There was just empty space there. Nevertheless, Shifeng succeeded in very accurately blocking 2 strikes. They all felt that Shifeng was not human but a monster in human guise, instead. How are his attacks so fast? Wen Hua was inwardly shocked when she saw this scene, her mind constantly replaying Shifeng's previous actions. Setting aside how Shifeng had managed to detect the location of the attacks, just being able to execute such quick counters from such a short distance was simply unbelievable. This was definitely not a feat an ordinary human being could accomplish. Her dynamic vision was among the best in the entire guild. Even if it were a baseball moving at 160 km per hour, she would be able to clearly see and count the number of rotations the ball was making. For attacks that no one else could see even the afterimages of, she could make out some afterimages. Although they would be extremely vague, she would still manage to see a small portion of the attack. However, Shifeng's slashes were completely different. Normally, when an attack was launched, the speed of the attack would start from 0 and slowly accelerate up to maximum speed. However, through some unknown technique, Shifeng's swords had gone from a standstill to moving at maximum speed instantly. There was no acceleration process in between whatsoever. Following which, Shifeng brandished his swords dozens of times, blocking every attack sent at him. Not a single scratch could be found on his body. Instead, the constant clangor of metal surrounded him. Seen from afar, Shifeng appeared to be training his swordsmanship all by himself. As more time passed, Shifeng grew accustomed to blocking the attacks of the assassins. Time to end this. Shifeng swept a glance at his surroundings, his lips curling up in a smile. At this moment, he no longer bothered to block the dagger striking at him. Instead, as if he had already anticipated this attack, his body smoothly sidestepped while his right arm swung at the location the dagger appeared from. Soon after, a streak of greenish blood stained the grassy ground. Chapter 898, Unseen Improvement. Chapter 898, Unseen Improvement. -1327. The instant this damage emerged, a blurry figure also appeared, the dark green HP bar above the figure's head shortening slightly. A moment after the HP bar showed up, however, the figure disappeared once more. Even when Shifeng tried launching another attack at the same position, the only thing his sword hit was air. There's only a 1.3-second period for a counterattack. That really is short. No wonder so many people have failed to clear this flaw. Shifeng was slightly surprised. He had never expected these monsters to have such a characteristic as well. Originally, it was already very difficult to grasp the attack trajectories of these monsters. Moreover, there wasn't just one monster attacking him. Based on Shifeng's perception, at least 5 monsters were attacking him. Yet, not only did he have to dodge the attacks of these monsters, but he also needed to launch a counterattack within such a short time frame. This greatly increased the difficulty of clearing the floor. Having no better choice, Shifeng could only continue silently blocking the attacks while searching for opportunities to counterattack. He often had to block over a dozen attacks before he got the opportunity to launch a counterattack. If he failed to grab this opportunity, he would have to block another dozen, or even 2 or 3 dozen, attacks. If an ordinary person were standing in Shifeng's place right now, they would surely feel bored at the moment. Shifeng, however, was actually joyous. He could not help but admit that the guidance provided by the battle tower was indeed excellent. All unawares, Shifeng had focused his full concentration on detecting the spatial fluctuations. As a result, the sensitivity of his 5 senses heightened while his grasp of his surroundings constantly deepened. It was normally impossible for one to encounter situations where subtle spatial fluctuations appeared around oneself. Hence, being able to hone his perception to such a fine degree right now was like a dream for Shifeng. Time passed quickly. Even when Shifeng had an opportunity to counterattack and deal damage to the Void Assassins, he did not take action. After all, this here was the best place for him to train right now. As his perception improved, Shifeng became increasingly sensitive to the subtle fluctuations caused by the Void Assassins. Initially, these weak fluctuations felt no different from tiny raindrops hitting his skin. Although he could feel them, his perception of them was not that clear. As a result, even when his body felt these fluctuations, his brain dismissed them as negligible. However, after sensing the fluctuations for thousands of times, his awareness of them intensified. Now, these fluctuations felt more like little pebbles hitting his body, instead, the pain more than sufficient to grab his attention. Even without his brain making any conscious decisions, he would instinctively react and turn towards the direction the fluctuations came from. It's no wonder super first-rate guilds and super guilds can nurture so many apex experts and even monsters that grasp a domain. Sure enough, they are not existences that even well-funded first-rate guilds can threaten. Shifeng inwardly sighed emotionally. He had profited massively from the trade with the secret pavilion this time. If not for this trade, he most likely would have remained unaware of just how frightening the major powers of God's domain were. Although he currently had a secret technique tablet and even an epic guild quest that could send him to the ancient battlefield, the Holy Land for experts, neither of those things could even compare with the battle tower. The value of the secret technique tablet lay in the fact that it allowed players to learn advanced combat techniques, which would, in turn, greatly increase their combat powers. The improvement in combat standards was only a bonus. Whether players could actually gain inspiration from learning the combat technique was a different matter altogether. As for the Holy Land, although Shifeng had never been there before, based on what he had heard about the place, the improvements one could gain there should be roughly equal to, or even inferior to, those from the battle tower. However, as the number of people the training system could accommodate was limited, the Holy Land seemed very valuable. Otherwise, the major powers of God's domain might not even bother to compete over entry to the Holy Land. What a pity. I thought he would clear the 4th floor as well. Now, it seems that it isn't possible. At the rate at which he is counterattacking, his stamina and concentration will run out before the battle is over. Didn't I say so already? That place is the silent hell. If even so many of our guild's top experts can't clear it, how could a newcomer like him possibly clear it? But the fact that he has lasted for so long is already plenty amazing. This is my first time seeing someone survive this long against those monsters. Indeed. The attacks of those monsters are simply impossible to predict. If it were up to me, I'd probably be dead in less than 5 seconds. Moreover, among our batch of trainees, not a single person has managed to last as long as Shifeng on the 4th floor. With this, he can be considered the number 1 player among us. Without anyone noticing, Shifeng had risen to become the first ranking player in everyone's hearts. At this moment, The members of the secret pavilion no longer looked at him arrogantly, all of them feeling only admiration for the swordsman. Just as everyone had thought that Shifeng's limit was the 4th floor, 2 streaks of green blood suddenly appeared before Shifeng, the void assassin that had its body exposed, losing close to a total of 2,700 HP. That should be enough practice. There's no point in continuing this training. Let's go to the 5th floor to take a look, then. After deciding so, Shifeng adjusted his breathing and finally launched his counterattack. After a long period of tempering himself with the void assassins, Shifeng could already react to the fluctuations they caused without paying deliberate attention to them. He could now place more of his concentration on dodging and attacking, instead. Although he could still improve slightly if he continued tempering himself, his remaining stamina did not permit him to do so. Moreover, compared to tempering his perception of the surrounding space, he was currently more interested in finding out what sort of trial awaited him on the 5th floor. What's going on? Shouldn't his stamina and concentration have declined significantly? Theoretically, his counterattack rate should gradually drop. So, why is it now increasing? The spectators were all shocked to see Shifeng behaving as if he had just taken a dose of stimulants. However, what no one knew was that, after undergoing that period of tempering, Shifeng's combat standards had received significant improvements. If before he had to focus 3/4 of his concentration on sensing the spatial fluctuations, he now needed to use only 1/3 of it to do so. This change allowed Shifeng's attack rate to increase over 3-fold. In less than 10 minutes, Shifeng had defeated all 8 void assassins, leaving only the chieftain-ranked null assassin, which had not moved at all since the start of the battle. The instant the 8th void assassin died, the null assassin finally took action. The instant the null assassin struck, Shifeng nearly lost his life. The null assassin's attack was exceedingly fast, and its strength was extremely powerful. It was simply impossible for Shifeng to evade the chieftain's strike even though he had managed to sense it coming. Reacting quickly, Shifeng launched an attack of his own at the null assassin's dagger, using the force of the impact to deflect the dagger's attack trajectory slightly so that it struck air, instead. So strong. Shifeng inwardly felt fortunate as he looked at his still trembling arm. If not for him requiring less concentration now to detect the spatial fluctuations and being able to invest more attention into attacking and evading, he would have most likely fallen to the null assassin already. He dodged it. Yuan Taishin was astounded as he looked at the unmarked Shifeng. He had expected Shifeng to suffer miserably when the null assassin took action. The reason for this assumption of his was because he understood just how powerful the null assassin was. Although he, too, was a Void Realm expert, he had suffered hundreds of defeats at the hands of the null assassin. Only after a long period of arduous training did he manage to defeat the null assassin. Moreover, even until now, his win rate against the null assassin was still not 100%. Hence, he never imagined that Shifeng would actually manage to deflect the null assassin's attack on his first try. The scariest part about the null assassin was its first attack. If one could avoid its first attack, the subsequent battle would become much simpler. Sure enough, after a short adjustment period, Shifeng launched his counterattack on the null assassin, continuously dealing damage to the chieftain. In the end, after a dozen minutes or so of strenuous battle, he depleted the null assassin's 200,000 HP. Chapter 899 Ranking Competitions Number 1. Chapter 899 Ranking Competitions Number 1. What? He cleared it, just like that. All of the spectators were stupefied as the null assassin's corpse appeared on the ground. Until now, not a single person among their trainees had conquered the silent hell. Although they knew that some of them would eventually clear the 4th floor, they never expected a newcomer from another guild to do so. Meanwhile, Shifeng's success caused an uproar among the other players in the main hall. Many people began to regret their decision to not watch Shifeng's battle. If they had done so, they might have learned something, allowing for minor breakthroughs. After all, every expert had their own strengths and weaknesses. If the other party's strength made up for what they lacked, they would gain some insight from watching the battle. Ha ha ha. You guys have seen it now, right? I'm not weak. It's that Shifeng is too strong. Among our batch, he ranks at the very top. With my abilities, How could I possibly be a match for him? When Violent Bear saw Shifeng clear the 4th floor, excitement replaced his previously defeated expression. He then turned to the fighters who had laughed at him and proudly proclaimed, "If you guys think I'm weak, why don't you challenge him, rather than spout bullshit from the sidelines?" Suddenly, the players who had previously mocked Violent Bear fell silent. Thinking back to the Berserker's battle against Shifeng, although Violent Bear had lost quite a few points, he had actually profited from the fight against an expert like Shifeng. Usually, for those with lower standards, it was impossible to find an opportunity to fight trainees who had reached the 4th floor. The latter despised fighting them. Violent Bear, on the other hand, had, unintentionally, scored a fight against an expert like Shifeng. If Violent Bear gained even a fragment of inspiration from that fight, the 800 points he had lost would have been worth it. If possible, they were willing to spend 500 or 600 points, 800 points, for a match against Shifeng. However, this opportunity had obviously passed. The fact that Shifeng had secured first place in the ranking competition meant that he no longer lacked battle points. Furthermore, why would Shifeng need to fight them? On the battle tower's 5th floor. As soon as Shifeng arrived, he felt a massive mental suppression weigh on him. This mental suppression was many times stronger than the abyssal blade had exuded when he executed a skill. He felt as if he stood before a Tier 5 monster, suffocating. His body's reaction speed and mobility were also heavily restricted. Aside from this oppressive pressure, he noticed that he stood in a dimly lit cave. Steam filled the cave, feeling like a massive sauna. The steam also hindered Shifeng's vision. Aside from Shifeng, 5 giant snakes with dark grey bodies and 3 heads each slithered in the steamy cavern. The snake's amber eyes glared at Shifeng. 3-headed snake, Special Elite. Level 30. HP 150 000 150 000. Before Shifeng could adapt to the environment here, the 5 3-headed snakes moved. Inside the rubble-filled cave, Shifeng's mobility was restricted. The 3-headed snakes, on the other hand, treated these obstacles as if they didn't exist. They moved through the cave like flowing water, easily overcoming the various obstacles in their path with unaffected speed. In the blink of an eye, all 5 snakes arrived before Shifeng. After the 5 3-headed snakes surrounded Shifeng, they began to spit needles of corrosive venom at the swordsman. The venomous needles rained down on Shifeng like thin rain. In this steamy environment, it was simply impossible to detect them with the naked eye. Shifeng could only determine the attack's trajectories by the fluctuations in the air. However, there were simply too many needles. A single 3-headed snake had spat over a dozen needles. With 5 3-headed snakes surrounding Shifeng, he faced was over 70 attacks. An ordinary person would have their hands full with just 5 of these attacks. Now, there were over 70. Moreover, even one of these attacks was more than enough to injure Shifeng heavily. The 5th floor's difficulty was clear to see. Even if Shifeng were at his peak, he could never defend against so many attacks. He needed to rely on quick movements to reduce the number of attacks he received. Only by doing so would he have any chance of survival. Moreover, not only were his reactions slowed right now, but he was also surrounded by a vile environment. With so many obstacles, it would be very easy to trip and fall if he moved too quickly, which would then open holes in his defense. However, even knowing this, Shifeng chose to run. If he simply stood there, the numerous attacks would claim his life. As expected of the battle tower's 5th floor. This isn't any place for ordinary human beings. Shifeng brandished his twin swords to deflect the venomous needles as he ran. Although these needles did not contain much force, there were many of them. Even after Shifeng ran, he had to face nearly 40 needles. With his blurred perception, a single mistake would result in the venomous needles finding their mark. Although each needle only dealt around -500 damage, Shifeng only had several thousand HP. Following which, as Shifeng ran through the cave and evaded the needles, his HP rapidly decreased. In the blink of an eye, Shifeng's HP reached 0, his body falling to the ground. In the end, he was teleported out of the battle tower. Even after Shifeng returned to the main hall, the spectators around the battle tower's portal were still in a daze. The 5th floor was absurdly difficult. Just watching the rain of venomous needles pelt Shifeng made a chill run down their spines. There was also that massive mental suppression to contend with. If they had to fight in such an environment, they wouldn't even last 2 seconds before becoming porcupines. However, Shifeng had managed to last over 10 seconds before succumbing to the near-invisible needles. If not for those attacks being so hard to detect, Shifeng could have survived for much longer. He might have even put up a good fight against those 3-headed snakes. Is this his current strength? After Cold Autumn exited spectator mode, he looked around him, a faint chill crawling down his back. Fortunately, he had experienced that battle as a spectator. Had he been fighting against that oppressive pressure, he would have been paralyzed. All he could have done was wait for death to take him. As for Wenhua, after seeing the difference between herself and Shifeng, she wasn't afraid in the least. On the contrary, she brimmed with fighting spirit, the corners of her lips lifting into a bright smile. Although she could clearly feel just how massive the gap was between them, she had obtained tremendous insight from watching Shifeng's fight. Previously, she had concentrated on a singular question: why were Shifeng's attacks so fast? However, after a long period of observation, she more or less gained some inspiration. Every time Shifeng attacked, his body began to move even before his sword did. By relying on his body's movements and energy transfer, his sword had already been accelerating for a brief period by the time he moved his arm. Hence, when Shifeng actually swung his sword, the sword seemed as if it instantly transitioned from a standstill to maximum speed. Although the theory sounded simple, one needed a degree of physical control that was beyond the scope of ordinary humans to accomplish this feat. Of course, Wenhua had a lot of confidence in herself. She believed that, if Shifeng could do it, there was no reason that she could not. Chapter 900 Challenge. Chapter 900 Challenge. Inside the Battle Fortress's main hall, a group of newcomers in linen clothing suddenly emerged from the training field's portal. The combat system here is really impressive. Those simulated experts felt like the real deal. They are all so powerful. Even in a one-on-one, they still suppressed me. When Blackie spoke about the combat training he had just experienced, he wore an amazed expression. When he fought the starter pack's first 8 experts, he has some hope of triumphing against them. However, the last 2 experts were absurdly powerful. They had defeated him easily, leaving him without any power to resist. It's a pity that there are so few experts in the starter pack. I wish we had more variations. Flying Shadowside. The secret pavilion is fraudulent. Just fighting those ordinary experts costs 100 points per day. If we can't rank among the top 200, we won't be able to afford them every day. Although he had only fought for a few hours against the starter pack's 10 experts, he had learned a lot. If he could face all kinds of experts over time, he would gain combat experience with flying speed. He might even reach the refinement realm after a short period. That should be enough training for us today. We still have to challenge the battle tower and raise our ranks, Firedance stated. Although she didn't want to waste their starter pack's duration, it was more important to raise their ranks first. If they didn't, they would be stuck with 20 battle points per day. After they had entered the training system, they had learned a lot about the battle tower and the pavilion's veterans from the other newcomers. To put it simply, it would not be easy to enter the top 200 ranks with their current strength. Furthermore, Firedance aimed for the top 150 ranks. Only by entering the top 150 would she receive 200 points each day, which would allow her to face 1 refinement realm expert per day. If she were stuck among the top 200, she would have to wait 2 days to challenge a refinement realm expert. As for the starter pack's experts, the first 8 weren't even a warm-up for her. Only the last 2 experts had made her work for her victory. Even after dozens of matches with those 2 experts, her win rate was only 50%. On the other hand, the secret pavilion's top 150 experts had at least an 80% win rate against the starter pack's refinement realm experts. With her current standards, it would be a relatively difficult task to enter the top 150. At the same time, she was very excited. There were only a handful of experts in Star Moon Kingdom that could pose a challenge. In the simulation training system, however, There were crowds of such experts waiting for her. Big sis Fire, look, for some reason, a lot of people have gathered over there. Violet Cloud pointed out as she looked towards the Battle Tower's portal. Curiously, she asked, what are they doing? When they had arrived at the battle fortress, not many people had been present. Now, however, over 100 people had crowded the main hall. Ah, someone seems to be leaving the tower, Kola said as he saw the portal flash with white light. The figure of a man then stepped out of the portal. After a moment, they recognized the familiar figure. A large crowd had huddled around the portal. As soon as Shifeng emerged, everyone turned towards him. They looked at Shifeng as if he were a monster, curiosity and horror flashing in their eyes. Shifeng was simply some newbie that had joined the training system today, yet, he had set foot onto the 5th floor. The secret pavilion's members had already been in the simulated training system for over a month. For some, this wasn't even their first year. Yet, they were all still stuck on the battle tower's 4th floor. Hence, Shifeng's achievement was difficult for them to swallow. Doesn't he look just over 20? He actually reached the 5th floor at such a young age. Even among all the geniuses throughout our secret pavilion's history, he should rank near the top, right? Yeah, he should rank within the top 20. Between Shifeng and Wenhua, who do you think has more talent? Do you even need to ask? It is certainly Wenhua. Even our guild leader can't stop praising her talent, claiming that she ranks among the top 10 throughout the secret pavilion's history. When Fire Dance and the others overheard the conversation, they were momentarily at a loss for words. They did not know whether they should celebrate or smile wryly. While their heads still ached about obtaining a better rank, Shifeng had already become number 1 in the ranking competition. Meanwhile, before Shifeng even had the chance to relive the battle on the 5th floor, he heard the sound of an emergency notification. Shifeng was then forcefully ejected out of the training system and forced into sleep mode. No one was surprised about Shifeng's sudden disappearance. They all thought that he had logged out to avoid their pestering. Moreover, training in the battle tower was very taxing. Almost everyone had to log out and rest after challenging the tower. Inside the luxurious bedroom, Shifeng climbed out from his virtual gaming cabin, the machine continuously beeping. A single tempering session in the battle tower consumes so much. Shifeng could not help his surprise when he saw the virtual gaming cabin's depleted nutrient solution tank. Before he had entered the training system, he had made sure to refill the cabin's nutrient solution storage and had drunk a bottle of A-rank nutrient fluid. The depleted nutrient solution was one thing, however, he was extremely hungry. Moreover, his entire body felt drained. This emptiness felt similar to when he had broken through the limits of his mental strength for the first time. It's no wonder why Yuan Taishin had warned me to prepare S-rank nutrient fluids. Ordinary people can't afford to play around with this training system. Shifeng, more or less, understood why Yuan Taishin had suggested caution. It seems I'll have to prepare some more S-rank nutrient fluids from now on. While inside the battle tower, he had pushed his 5 senses to their brinks for a long time. In God's domain, however, he usually didn't need to. It was especially true after one reached his standard. While fighting at one's peak, the brain would be extremely active. This would increase the body's energy consumption. If one did not replenish the lost energy afterward, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was even possible to destroy one's own body. Now that Fire Dance and the others had begun their training in the simulation training system, they needed enough nutrient supplements after they emerged. Otherwise, their bodies would suffer. However, it was extremely difficult to obtain the best-performing S-rank nutrient fluid. Only transcendental powers like the Secret Pavilion, which were influential in both the real world and the virtual world, could obtain large quantities. As for a foundationless guild like Zero Wing, it could, at most, obtain a few bottles. Furthermore, each bottle was very expensive. Meanwhile, Shifeng needed the coins he had on hand to keep the guild functioning, and he had not liquidated any funds recently. As for the credits he had on hand, Liang Jing had already used them to purchase training facilities. Currently, he was almost broke. It seems I'll have to turn some of the coins or items into money for now. Shifeng sighed helplessly. Truthfully, He did not wish to exchange any of the game's resources for credits. After all, doing so would impact the guild's development. However, nurturing a group of top-tier experts was far more important right now. Just as Shifeng pondered selling the resources of God's domain, Liang Jing barged into his room, looking worried. "Master Shifeng, something has happened," Liang Jing said, panting. With her hand over her chest, she continued, "A group of people has suddenly arrived to challenge our training center. Several instructors have been injured. From what I have heard, this group defeated Master Chen Wu before arriving. They are demanding a match against you. They claim that there will be consequences if their demands aren't met." Challenge? Who are they? What do they look like? Shifeng recalled a faint memory after hearing these words. Chapter 901 Silent Blade. Chapter 901 Silent Blade. Inside the bustling dojo, hundreds of people had gathered around the arena. This dojo is pathetic. These instructors are just garbage. They're completely misguiding the students here. With such skills, they even dare start up a dojo? Hey, you guys, you're better off training somewhere else. With these trash instructors teaching you, you won't get anywhere in a fighting competition, no matter how long you train. It's no wonder why, after so many years, this city has not produced a single, decent professional fighter. Of course, you're not to blame. Rather, it's these garbage instructors' fault. If it were up to me, I would pack up and leave after finding out how crappy these instructors are. I wouldn't waste my youth here. Over a dozen youths in their 20s wearing dark grey martial artist robes glanced at the middle-aged instructor who had just been defeated, disgust filling their gazes. These grey-robed youths then sent sympathetic gazes towards the hundreds of teenagers training inside the hall. Although the Big Dipper Dojo's trainees were furious, none of them dared to speak up, remaining silent as they watched this scene play out. These dozen or so people who had suddenly shown up were just too strong. Among these people, one indifferent youth, who looked to be roughly the same age as they were, had single-handedly defeated 6 of their highly skilled instructors. Moreover, none of their instructors had landed a finger on this indifferent youth. Even someone who knew nothing of martial arts could see the disparity in their strengths. If they had to challenge that youth, they probably wouldn't last one move. It was extremely difficult to defeat an opponent in a single move. It was even more so in an actual battle. Generally, such situations only occurred when martial artists fought an ordinary person. To put it simply, it was only possible if there was a massive difference between the fighters' strengths. The hundreds of teenage trainees felt an immense pressure weigh on them when they looked at the thin, indifferent youth. Seeing the quiet trainees, the fierce, bald man standing at the forefront of the grey-robed youths smirked with satisfaction. "How about it? You've seen the difference in our abilities for yourselves. We have come from the White Tiger Dojo. Recently, our dojo has considered establishing a branch in this city. This is a chance for all of you. If you perform well in the branch dojo, you might even get the chance to train in the main dojo. At that time, you will be the star of tomorrow's fighting competition. You won't have to waste your lives in this tiny place." Hearing the bald man's offer, everyone was momentarily stunned. They immediately understood why even Master Chen Wu was no match for these youths. They had heard about the White Tiger Dojo. Anyone who wanted to join the world of fighting knew about it. Many famous contestants, who had taken part in past national fighting competitions, originated from the White Tiger Dojo. The dojo had even nurtured well-known, international fighters in the past. Countless youths that wanted their own fame in the fighting world dreamed of joining the White Tiger Dojo. However, they had never imagined that the White Tiger Dojo would open a branch in their city. Before the bald man could say more, the dojo's doors swung open. Having captured everyone's attention, Shifeng and Liang Jing approached the bald man. Immediately, the trainees grew excited. Shifeng was the Big Dipper Dojo's head instructor. Despite being so young, he had attained this position by relying on his own strength. He was their revered idol. In fact, many among them had specifically joined the dojo because they had heard Shifeng was an instructor here. However, Shifeng normally lived in the Greenwater Villa, only occasionally venturing to the dojo. Hence, they did not see him often. "You are the head instructor?" The bald man's lips twisted into a sneer, glaring at Shifeng with disdain. He had heard that the newly established Big Dipper Dojo had a 20-something-year-old martial artist who guided the students. He had thought it had been a joke. Now, however, it seemed that the rumor was true. The man before him wore cheap, dark blue sportswear, and he didn't appear strong. Not only did the man seem a little pale, but he also lacked the aura of a martial artist. It was hard to imagine how such a weakling had wormed his way into the position of head instructor. In his opinion, Shifeng was weaker than the instructors that had already been defeated. At the very least, their auras had been passable. That's right. Why have you come looking for me in such a hurry?" Shifeng swept a glance over the dozen or so members from the White Tiger Dojo, becoming more confident in his conjecture. In the past, after God's Domain launched the mind-space system, the well-known dojos throughout the nation had begun to expand. These dojos had set up branches in various cities in an attempt to poach members and expand their influence, hoping to attract major corporations' investments. Although some dojos had received these investments, the majority had not. These corporations' intentions had been obvious. They had all wanted to nurture a powerful guild of their own in God's domain. However, compared to recruiting ordinary players, it was far more efficient to recruit fighters from dojos, who were already familiar with actual combat. Moreover, God's domain wouldn't impact these fighters' daily routines. These people only needed to play God's domain while they slept. With this, not only would the fighting world and virtual gaming world remain separate, but they would also form a mutually beneficial relationship, helping each other improve. Both sides would make more money. Knowing this, the major corporations that had been interested in the mind-space system had refused to ignore such a valuable opportunity. Among the country's dojos, the White Tiger Dojo had chosen to set up branches in over a dozen third-tier cities. Jinhai City had been one of those cities. Back then, the city's various dojos had despaired upon hearing the news. These dojos had originally chosen to develop in a third-tier city precisely because they could not compete with the dojos in first- and second-tier cities. When the major dojos had targeted their cities, they had been forced out of business. In the end, many of Jinhai City's dojos had been forced to cooperate with the White Tiger Dojo. Once Shifeng saw the White Tiger Dojo's members, his gaze stopped on the indifferent youth behind the bald man. Shifeng knew this youth. He had been extremely famous in Jinhai City. Moreover, after joining God's domain, he had become unstoppable. In the past, he had been known as Silent Blade in God's domain. At his peak, he had been a Tier 5 berserker who ranked 58th on the God's domain experts list. Unfortunately, his entry into God's domain was somewhat late. Otherwise, his achievements in the game would have been even greater. Our White Tiger Dojo is thinking of opening a branch in Jinhai City, so we've come to say hello. We were also hoping to spar with you. I wonder if Instructor Shi is interested. The bald man laughed. Spar? Shifeng's lips hooked up slightly. Shaking his head, he said, "Why doesn't it look like that to me? The White Tiger Dojo is so famous that even a layman such as myself knows of it. Is it necessary to venture all the way here to poach our members? Don't say it like that. We are just trying to conduct honest business. Naturally, we have to provide better options to those who wish to join the fighting world." The bald man laughed. He didn't take Shifeng seriously in the least. In his opinion, Shifeng was merely a puppet that Big Dipper had employed to run this dojo. The man didn't qualify to speak to him at all. "I've heard that you are quite powerful. I have always admired those with strength. I wonder, would you be willing to spar with me? We can show everyone whether or not your strength is superficial." Chapter 902, Class vs. Class. Chapter 902, Class vs. Class. The bald man's sarcasm earned the displeasure of many within the dojo. Just as Liang Jing was about to step forward and say something, Shifeng held her back with a hand. He was also familiar with this bald man. The man's name was Gan Xingting, and he was one of the White Tiger Dojo's advanced disciples. The man was quite strong, even stronger than Chen Wu. He was very active in all sorts of fighting competitions and had earned himself some fame. Hence, he had the confidence to wipe the floor with every martial arts instructor in Jinhai City. What's wrong? Afraid? Gan Xingtang sneered. In Gan Xingtang's opinion, Shi Feng's pale complexion was definitely due to fear. With this thought, he became even more certain that Shi Feng was afraid of sparring with him. I'm not particularly opposed to a sparring match. However, if I catered to every random person who burst into our dojo to challenge me, wouldn't I die from exhaustion? Shi Feng responded softly. Shi Feng's retort didn't fluster Gan Xingtang in the least. Rather, he laughed as he continued to run his mouth, saying, "The high and mighty head instructor of the Big Dipper Dojo only knows how to make up excuses. Instructor Shi, aren't you afraid that you might become a laughingstock if others in our industry heard about your cowardice?" Initially, he had thought that the Big Dipper Dojo's rumored martial arts master was truly quite powerful. Now, however, it seemed that those rumors had been nothing but lies. I see that the Big Dipper Dojo only amounts to so much. If even its head instructor is too afraid to spar, what's the point of starting a dojo? Might as well switch professions, start a dance hall instead. You and I are closer in age. If you don't want to spar with senior brother Gan, how about my challenge? Do you dare to accept it? Although Gan Xingtang was not angry, the intermediate disciples behind him were more than raring to fight. Wrathful flames filled their eyes when they looked at Shi Feng, and they wanted nothing more than to teach him a lesson, showing him exactly how powerful the White Tiger Dojo was. Any one of the White Tiger Dojo's advanced disciples could easily serve as a dojo's head instructor in a second-tier city. Even Chen Wu, Jinhai City's top expert, had lost to senior brother Gan, yet Shi Feng had actually implied that their senior brother wasn't qualified to fight him. It was an insult to the White Tiger Dojo and their senior brother Gan. In their opinions, even one of the White Tiger Dojo's basic disciples could easily defeat Shi Feng with a few moves. Sparring against their senior brother Gan was too much of a privilege for this man. Don't misunderstand me. I did not refuse your invitation to spar. However, since you are White Tiger Dojo members, I can't use my status as an instructor to bully you, right? I intend to allow our disciples to spar with you. What do you think? Shi Feng asked as he glanced at Gan Xingtang. The entire dojo fell silent as Shi Feng finished his question. The crowd from the White Tiger Dojo looked at Shi Feng as if he were an idiot. If even the Big Dipper Dojo's instructors were no match for them, why would the disciples have any chance? Even with one hand tied behind their backs, they could easily defeat any of Big Dipper's disciples. Meanwhile, when the Big Dipper Dojo's disciples heard Shi Feng, they were all dumbfounded. They had already learned how terrifying the White Tiger Dojo was when they had watched the previous fights. Even if they fought together in groups of 5 or 6, they wouldn't be a match for one of the White Tiger Dojo's fighters, much less in a one-on-one. Sure. Only, once every Big Dipper disciple has been defeated, I hope that you will stop giving me excuses and spar against me yourself. Gan Xingtang sneered and nodded. Rest assured, if you win, I will step up. Shi Feng laughed. He then turned to Liang Jing and said, "Fetch Fire Dance and the others." "Fetch them." "But aren't they?" Liang Jing was momentarily stunned by Shi Feng's order. After she had become Shi Feng's assistant, he had often enlisted her help to manage some of Zero Wing Workshop's affairs. Hence, she knew Fire Dance and the others' identities. None of these people were professional fighters, they were professional gamers. Rather than having them fight the White Tiger's members, it would be more effective if the dojo's disciples fought. Go! It's about time they take part in an actual battle. Shi Feng understood the reason for Liang Jing's shock. However, he still had her summon Fire Dance and the others. Fire Dance's group might not be professional fighters, but after such a long stay in the Greenwater Villa, they had undergone various training. Lei Bao had even guided their foundations. In addition, they received an endless supply of A-rank nutrient fluids and the occasional S-rank nutrient fluid. Their current physiques were already many times stronger than when they had first arrived at the Greenwater Villa. Fire Dance and the others had even surprised a martial artist like Lei Bao, and the man often praised the group for being martial arts geniuses. Lei Bao had even wanted to accept them as his personal disciples. Unfortunately, Shi Feng had rejected his requests. A short moment later, Fire Dance and the others entered the dojo. Immediately, their appearance caused a great commotion. When the White Tiger Dojo group saw Fire Dance and the others, their jaws nearly hit the floor. Rage flashed in their eyes as thoughts of murdering Shifeng surfaced in their minds. Originally, they had thought that Shifeng had summoned a group of powerful experts to spar against them. Now, however, it would seem that he was simply ridiculing them. The group Shifeng had called to face them actually included girls. Although there was no lack of female disciples in the various dojos, and there were female-only competitions in major fighting competitions, males and females were simply on different levels. The fact that Shifeng had sent for a female disciple trampled on their glory and pride. Why wouldn't they be angry? Instructor Shi, are you trying to insult the White Tiger Dojo? Gan Xingting asked Shifeng with a frosty tone. Gan Xingting intended to wait for an answer. However, Fire Dance walked up to the arena and pointed at the White Tiger's members, issuing her challenge, "One-on-one matches will be too boring. I want to take on all of you at once." Before the White Tiger Dojo's members could react, Liang Jing nearly fainted. Just who did Fire Dance think these people were? This wasn't a game, they were all bona fide fighting experts. They were not random monsters that one could casually defeat in a game. Liang Jing had thought of warning Fire Dance. However, seeing the murderous looks from White Tiger Dojo members, she rushed up to Shifeng and said softly, "Master Shifeng, please ask her to stop. These people are from the White Tiger Dojo. If she angers them and they stop holding back, someone will end up in the hospital." "You're right," Shifeng nodded. He then looked towards Fire Dance and said, "Hold back. We shouldn't hospitalize them. If it were Kola or Yi Wumian, they could have played with their opponents without hurting them too badly. If it were up to Fire Dance, however, her opponents would be in danger. After all, Fire Dance had never fought ordinary people before. After reaching the refinement realm, she usually only trained with Lei Bao. If she fought an ordinary person, she could miscalculate her opponent and use too much strength. "I understand." Fire Dance nodded and smiled. Shifeng's instructions left Liang Jing speechless. Although she wanted to inform him that that was not what she had meant, the indifferent youth from the White Tiger Dojo had entered the arena. As for the other White Tiger members, they shouted their indignation. "You Zipping, you better not hold back just because she's pretty. Show them the strength of the White Tiger Dojo. You Zipping, if you can't defeat her with a single move, I'll mock you forever." The visiting fighters' eyes were all bloodshot with anger. They all wished they were in the cold Yu Zipping's place, eager to show these bumpkins from the Big Dipper Dojo the extent of their strength. Meanwhile, Gan Xingting laughed out of anger. He even wondered if Shifeng acted out of desperation after realizing the hopelessness of the Big Dipper's situation. Yu Zipping nodded seriously as he turned to Fire Dance with a chilling expression. Since Yu Zipping was already prepared, Shifeng promptly initiated the fight. "All right, then. Since you have decided, let the match begin." Chapter 903, Who's Next? Chapter 903, Who's Next? When Shifeng announced the start of the battle, Yu Zipping shot the man a glance, surprise flashing in his eyes. Shifeng was simply too calm. He had participated in many fighting competitions before and had met people of various standards, so he could tell that Shifeng's serenity was not an act. Rather, his calm originated from absolute confidence as if everything were within his control. However, in his opinion, his match against Fire Dance was unbalanced. Fire Dance had no chance of winning against him. After all, females were generally weaker than males. It was especially true for a great beauty like Fire Dance. Although Fire Dance wore a set of dark blue sportswear, her clothing couldn't hide her curvaceous body. She looked nothing like a muscular gorilla. On the contrary, she looked like someone who often practiced yoga. Her perfect figure only contained charm, not strength. In the face of absolute strength, all trickery was useless. All martial artists knew this. In terms of strength, although he was not at the peak of the White Tiger Dojo's intermediate disciples, he was still considered above average. Currently, he had a punching strength of 422 kilograms. Although he barely qualified to participate in the National Youth Championship, in a third-tier city like Jinhai City, he could definitely rank among the city's top fighters. In an actual fight, it was not easy for one to make up the difference in strength. That required a wealth of combat experience and techniques. However, while he might only be 18 years old, he had already participated in over a dozen large-scale competitions. He possessed a considerable amount of combat experience. He even frequently sparred with the dojo's advanced disciples. In terms of combat techniques, he was already on their level. With the advantage of strength, experience, and techniques, losing was impossible. So, why was Shifeng so calm? Where was his confidence coming from? However, Yu Ziping quickly shook these questions away as he returned his gaze to Fire Dance. He no longer wanted to think about what might be going through Shifeng's mind. Defeating Fire Dance was his priority. With this match, he would teach Shifeng the meaning of a true professional fighter. Fall! Yu Ziping shouted, his voice as cold as snow. Like an arrow, he dashed to Fire Dance and sent a fierce punch towards her abdomen. His attack was both fast and precise. He did not hold back in the least. Ziping sure is vicious. No matter what is going on, his opponent is still a great beauty, yet he's not showing any mercy, Gan Xingting muttered with sympathy. With this, the match would end as quickly as it had begun. Even in the White Tiger Dojo, Yu Ziping was looked upon favorably. However, the boy had one shortcoming: he did not know how to hold back. To a youth, however, this was a benefit. If one were frequently distracted, it would be very difficult to improve. Peng! The sound of a collision radiated from the arena. She blocked it. How is that possible? The people below the arena stared at Fire Dance in disbelief. The impact should have sent Fire Dance flying, yet she had actually blocked Yu Ziping's fist with one hand. It was truly hard to imagine just how that thin, frail arm could endure so much force. Logically, her arm should have been knocked away. No one would have been surprised if her bones had cracked or shattered. However, Fire Dance showed no sign of pain. On the contrary, she had received Yu Ziping's full power punch as if she had reached out to say hello. Yu Ziping was also momentarily stunned. Hurriedly, he tried to withdraw. However, he suddenly discovered that his fist would not budge no matter how hard he tried. Fire Dance's tender fingers clasped his fist like chains. With no other choice, Yu Ziping raised his left leg and swept it towards Fire Dance's neck. Peng! However, Fire Dance caught his iron-like leg with her other hand. As if he had predicted this, Yu Ziping quickly sent a follow-up punch with his other hand. Just before Yu Ziping's fist struck Fire Dance's face, a creak echoed throughout the dojo. In the next moment, Yu Ziping released an agonizing scream, his fist halting as he suddenly tumbled to the ground. The fist and ankle that Fire Dance had caught had already begun to turn purple. The various spectators were flabbergasted. Having forgotten about the pale-faced Yu Ziping, everyone stared at Fire Dance with awe. Fire Dance's performance was simply too shocking. Nobody could believe their eyes. Among the crowd, the White Tiger Dojo members were the most affected. They knew just how strong Yu Ziping was. Among their group, only 2 or 3 people were stronger than him. Yet, in front of Fire Dance, Yu Ziping was as powerful as a child. What technique! What combat experience! In front of absolute strength, they were nothing. Does she have some kind of godly strength? Gan Xingting's expression was somber as he looked at the injured Yu Ziping. Fire Dance was merely a young girl. However, even he was far weaker than her. He couldn't compete with her strength in a fight. He could only rely on his speed and techniques to secure victory. Liang Jing, who stood beside Shifeng, was similarly stunned. She had assumed that Fire Dance would be hospitalized after this match. She had never imagined that Fire Dance was actually this powerful. Is she a hidden master like Shifeng? Liang Jing could not help but wonder. There was no other way to explain this overwhelming victory. However, there was one factor that confused Liang Jing. If Fire Dance possessed such skills, why hasn't she participated in any fighting competitions? With her skills, she would even perform excellently in the national competition. If she could earn herself a victory, she would earn an unimaginable amount of money. She wouldn't need to continue working as a professional gamer. As for Shifeng, he glanced at the stunned Liang Jing before shifting his gaze to Yu Ziping, who was still on the ground. He shook his head and sighed, saying, "Of all the things you could have relied on, you chose physical strength." After Fire Dance had reached the refinement realm, her body's physique had improved rapidly. Moreover, with Lei Bao's guidance, she had already grasped the technique to utilize internal force. To Fire Dance, a punching strength 4 or 500 kilograms was not difficult to achieve. Yu Ziping had been looking for a beating by relying on physical strength. If the boy had simply used his combat experience, he might have lasted a little longer. "I believe that the outcome has been decided. Take him away," Shi Feng said, pointing at Yu Ziping as he looked at Gan Xingting. Only now did the White Tiger members recover from their daze. This match was over. They had even forgotten that one of their companions was injured and needed immediate medical attention. "Relax, I didn't use that much force. His bones should be intact. After some treatment, he just needs to rest for a few days to recover," Fire Dance explained as she looked down at the silent Yu Ziping. She then turned to Gan Xingting, who stood below the arena, and quietly asked, "The first match is over. Who's next?" Chapter 904 – Difference in Experience. Chapter 904 – Difference in Experience. Fire Dance's voice was like a jade bead falling to the ground as it resounded throughout the dojo. Although her voice was not loud, her words had ingrained themselves into everyone's minds, making them impossible to forget. The White Tiger Dojo members instantly paled at these words. Every one of them silently turned to their companions, lacking their previous confidence. Yu Ziping's overall strength could rank second among their group, only Gan Xingting was slightly stronger. They would only suffer if they fought Fire Dance. In contrast, the Big Dipper's disciples stared at Fire Dance with reverence. Even Yu Ziping, who had beaten their instructors, had been defeated in less than a handful of moves. Fire Dance's strength was astounding. Moreover, when they saw the visiting fighters' fear, a bliss sprouted in their hearts. So what if the White Tiger Dojo was impressive? In the end, its disciples had still lost against their Big Dipper Dojo. Aside from helping them vent their stress, Fire Dance's victory reassured them of their decision to join the Big Dipper Dojo. Before they had joined the Big Dipper Dojo, they had already heard some rumors. They heard that, in the Greenwater Villa, there were some people who were undergoing special training. However, they had no idea about what that special training entailed. Looking at it now, however, they were absolutely sure that the villa was a training ground for martial arts masters. If they performed well, they might even have a chance to participate in that special training. If they could have even half of Fire Dance's abilities, they could nurture a powerful reputation for themselves within Jinhai City. They might even make a name for themselves in the large-scale competitions in their province. After all, even Gan Xingting, who had defeated Hall Master Chen Wu, wore a grim expression. His fear of Fire Dance was obvious. In the past, Chen Wu had become Jinhai City's champion fighter, and his results in the provincial competitions had been impressive. "Is nobody willing to face me?" Fire Dance asked once more as she swept a glance over the White Tiger Dojo members. Before she had come to the dojo, she had heard from Liang Jing just how powerful the White Tiger Dojo's members were and had been warned to be careful against them. However, after that first match, she did not consider these people particularly strong. On the contrary, she thought they were pitifully weak. When Yu Ziping had attacked, he had left several holes in his defense. There had just been too many excess movements. Even Violet Cloud could defeat Yu Ziping easily, not to mention someone like her, who knew how to use internal force. What Fire Dance did not know was that, during her time in the Greenwater Villa, her strength had long since surpassed ordinary people. However, since she was usually cooped up inside the villa, she hadn't had much contact with the outside world. Hence, she had not noticed these tremendous changes. "I'll be your opponent." Gan Xingting had already realized that this opponent was more than he could handle. However, to preserve the White Tiger Dojo's glory, he had to take center stage even if it meant humiliation. Before coming to Jinhai City, the main branch had made it clear that his group needed to wipe the floor with every dojo in Jinhai City, paving the way for their branch dojo. Even Yu Ziping could deal with these bumpkins easily, not to mention a senior like him. Chen Wu should have been the only troublesome opponent they encountered. As for the martial arts master that governed the Big Dipper training center, he did not believe the rumor. Even their White Tiger dojo had to treat martial arts masters with respect. How could an exalted figure possibly be content in a third-tier city like Jinhai City? Although Gan Xingting was unsure if Jinhai City actually housed a martial arts master, he was certain that Fire Dance was an expert who shouldn't be taken lightly. At the very least, if they wanted a high chance of defeating her, they needed one of the White Tiger Dojo's instructors to take her on. However, not all hope was lost yet. No matter what was said or done, he was an advanced disciple from the White Tiger Dojo. His combat experience and strength far surpassed Yu Ziping's. Previously, Yu Ziping had sparred against Fire Dance without knowing anything about her. Now that he knew that Fire Dance was extraordinarily strong, he would not make the same mistake. As long as he maintained a certain distance from Fire Dance and waited for her to reveal a flaw in her defense, he could defeat her. Moreover, based on Fire Dance's appearance, the girl only looked to be in her early 20s. She didn't have much combat experience. No matter how much she trained, actual combat was different. She would reveal her flaws when she attacked. As Gan Xingting considered the upcoming fight, Shifeng announced the start of the sparring session. As soon as Shifeng shouted start, Fire Dance crossed the distance of 5 yards like a leopard and arrived before Gan Xingting in the blink of an eye. She proceeded to send an open palm strike towards Gan Xingting's chest. The wind whistled as her palm sliced through the air. So fast. Surprised, Gan Xingting abruptly retreated. Fortunately for Gan Xingting, he had evaded Fire Dance's fast attack in the nick of time, with the latter's palm stopping just a few centimeters from his chest. This single exchange struck fear into Gan Xingting's heart. He hadn't expected her to have explosive speed in addition to an absurd amount of physical strength. Had that attack struck, with Fire Dance's strength, he would have had some trouble breathing in the best-case scenario. In the worst-case scenario, his ribs would have broken, and he would have lost consciousness on the spot. However, Fire Dance's sudden attack had revealed a hole in her defense. When she had thrust her palm forward, she had left her side exposed. As long as he attacked that location, Fire Dance wouldn't be able to defend against his attack. HMPH. In the end, a youngster is still a youngster. Because you're so eager to win, you've exposed such a basic flaw. Gan Xingting inwardly laughed. He then sent a roundhouse kick at Fire Dance. Both this kick's speed and power were far more refined than Yu Ziping's. Just as Gan Xingting's leg was about to connect with Fire Dance's side, Fire Dance moved, her other hand snaking out to grasp the man's leg. Suddenly, she jumped and twisted in the air, and with Gan Xingting's leg as a pivot point, she planted her feet straight onto his face. Immediately, Gan Xingting's face flattened, blood spurting from his nostrils and his eyes rolling as his head was thrown back. Gan Xingting felt the world spin. He couldn't even feel pain. After taking a few steps back, his body abruptly fell to the mat as he fainted. Senior brother Gan, the White Tiger Dojo's members cried out. None of them could believe what had just happened. They all felt as if they were dreaming. Just how fast had Gan Xingting's kick been? They had only seen an afterimage of his leg, yet Fire Dance had managed to grab it and use it as a pivot point, utilizing the flaw she had exposed to land a finishing blow. How much combat experience and how much reaction speed was required to carry out this feat? Even their instructors couldn't replicate Fire Dance's counterattack. Yu Ziping, who rested below the arena, was dazed when he saw this. He finally understood that his loss had not been a simple lack of strength. Fire Dance had only chosen the simplest, most efficient method to deal with him because the gap between them was simply too massive. However, there was one point that he could not make sense of. How did Fire Dance gain such a frightening amount of combat experience? To perform that kind of counterattack, one needed extremely precise control over their bodies. Any mistakes could easily put one in peril. Only those who frequently dealt with such situations could execute such an accurate strike at such a crucial moment. Yet, how old was Fire Dance? How could she possibly possess that much life-and-death experiences? Are you wondering why there is such a huge disparity between your combat experience? Shifeng asked as he walked up to Yu Ziping. As if he knew the boy's thoughts, he smiled and said, "If you wish to know, I can tell you. Chapter 905 Workshop expands. Chapter 905 Workshop expands. Are you seriously willing to say it? Yu Ziping eyed Shifeng suspiciously. Accumulating combat experience was not something easy to do, especially combat experience involving life-and-death situations. Training under such circumstances was practically gambling with one's life. There were quite a number of martial artists who had destroyed their own futures as a result of such training. If there actually was a method to accumulate life-and-death combat experience, improving rapidly within a short time would be an easy task. This rapid improvement was also the reason why so many martial arts experts liked to challenge their own limits. Of course. However, I have a condition, Shifeng laughed. I knew it. Forget it. I won't be joining your dojo. Yu Ziping let out a soft snort. He had long since known that a person like Shifeng wouldn't reveal such a huge secret without conditions. However, Shifeng's attempt at poaching him would only end up in failure. Many major dojos in first-tier cities had come scouting Yu Ziping ever since his talent became known. Some had even offered very excellent treatment, much better than what he was currently receiving from the instructors of the White Tiger Dojo. However, he had still rejected them all. He was not someone who would betray his benefactor. When he was at his lowest, the White Tiger Dojo had given him an opportunity. Had the White Tiger Dojo not nurtured him, he would not have his current achievements today. Simply put, he would not abandon the White Tiger Dojo just for his own benefit. This kid sure thinks highly of himself. I really don't know what the chief sees in him, to actually want to nurture someone like him. Standing a short distance away, the bear-like Kola clicked his tongue when he overheard Yu Ziping's response, highly annoyed by Yu Ziping's attitude. Whether it was in God's domain or Jinhai City, as long as Shifeng said that he was looking to nurture someone, tons of people would definitely come swarming. The boss might have his own thoughts, said Yi Wumian standing beside Kola. After taking a look at Yu Ziping, he continued, however, that kid indeed possesses some talent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become an intermediate disciple of the White Tiger Dojo at such a young age. Even his fellow intermediate disciples are looking at him with respect. Although Kola and the others spoke softly, their voices still failed to escape Shifeng's ears. The human brain ruled everything in the body. After Shifeng's brain activity improved, his 5 senses had also become much more acute. The trials of the battle tower, in particular, had further honed his 5 senses. Not to mention a distance of over a dozen yards, even if Kola and the others stood over 20 yards away from him, so long as he focused slightly, he would still hear their whispers. Meanwhile, regarding his companion's sotto voce discussion, Shifeng could only laugh inwardly in understanding. After all, not everyone was a reincarnator like he was. They did not know the things that would happen in the future. Not to mention, Yu Ziping was currently still a diamond in the rough. Who could possibly expect him to become an expert ranked within the top 50 of the God's Domain experts list in the future? Seeing Yu Ziping rejecting his offer righteously, Shifeng laughed and said, "You misunderstood. I'm not trying to scout you into the Big Dipper Dojo. I'm only inviting you to join the Zero Wing Gaming Workshop. Doing so won't affect your daily life in any way." "Join a gaming workshop?" Surprised, Yu Ziping asked, "For real?" In the current era, there were many gaming workshops in society. There were also plenty of professional gamers. Although not comparable to the fighting industry, the gaming industry was still an increasingly important business sector. Moreover, the majority of gaming workshops operated in the wee hours of the night, so joining one would not affect one's daily life. If he could really increase his life-and-death combat experience just by joining a gaming workshop, this would definitely be a worthwhile exchange. Shifeng nodded before turning to look at the members of Big Dipper and White Tiger and announcing, "This offer isn't just you but for everyone present. As long as you are below the age of 25, all of you have an opportunity to join Zero Wing's workshop." Zero Wing was already developing quite well. Originally, Shifeng had planned to wait a little while longer before recruiting for Zero Wing's internal training program. Now that a major dojo like the White Tiger Dojo had already started making its move and begun poaching talents en masse, he naturally could not fall behind. Previously, He had only intended to nurture a few core members of Zero Wing at the Greenwater Villa, so he had not bothered dragging in the disciples of the Big Dipper Dojo. Now that he had such an excellent opportunity, he could use this chance to recruit a few good talents and start internally nurturing experts in large numbers, just like the various major powers of God's domain. With this, he wouldn't have to worry about lacking experts or talents getting poached away. Everyone was momentarily stunned when they heard this. Liang Jing was also at a loss for words. This place was a dojo, a place that nurtured experts for the world of fighting, yet Shifeng was actually recruiting these people to become professional gamers. Doing so was simply ludicrous. If Director Xiao learned of this matter, he was sure to fly into a rage. Instructor Sure, if we join Zero Wing's workshop, will we really become stronger? A few disciples asked curiously. Hearing these disciples asking such a question rendered Fire Dance and the others speechless. They were the high and mighty Zero Wing. Moreover, when all was said and done, Zero Wing was extremely famous in Star Moon Kingdom, and even possessed some fame in the world of God's domain. Despite all that, these people actually did not know anything about them. Of course, they also understood that, although these disciples might know about virtual reality games, their lifelong goal had always been to achieve fame in the world of fighting. Hence, they rarely came into contact with pleasure-seeking activities, focusing their all into training their bodies, instead. How could a bunch of people who had precious little exposure to virtual reality games possibly have heard of Zero Wing's name? Let's put it this way. If you can pass the test and join the Zero Wing workshop, I can assure you that it won't be long before you become much stronger than your present selves, Shifeng said definitively. I want to take part in the test. I want to try as well. Immediately, many disciples in the dojo raised their hands and voiced their intent to apply for Zero Wing's workshop, every one of them firmly believing Shifeng's words. After all, Fire Dance was the best example. Even Gan Xingting, who had managed to defeat Hall Master Chen Wu, suffered a quick defeat at her hands. What about you guys? Shifeng asked as he looked at the youths of the White Tiger Dojo. No. Absolutely not, shouted Gan Xingting, who had just regained consciousness. As long as you are a member of the White Tiger Dojo, you are not allowed to join any kind of workshop. Otherwise, you will be expelled. Some of the White Tiger Dojo members, who had initially been entertaining thoughts of taking the test, immediately lowered their heads at these words. Senior Brother Gan, why is this so? A short youth asked curiously. Logically, there should not be any clash between a dojo and a gaming workshop. Disciples would normally take on part-time jobs. After all, not everyone could make a living out of participating in competitions, and the dojo did not provide everyone with financial support. They still needed to live. Joining a gaming workshop could be considered a part-time job. Moreover, it was more lucrative than any other part-time job. Chapter 906, You Will Regret It. Chapter 906, You Will Regret It. Shifeng was also somewhat surprised by Gan Xingting's yelling. He then shot a curious look at Gan Xingting, whose countenance had completely distorted. Something occurred to Shifeng. The White Tiger Dojo might have already entered into a partnership with a corporation, and instead of recruiting more members to attract investors, it was already preparing to enter God's domain. Meanwhile, in reply to the questions posed by the disciples of the White Tiger Dojo, Gan Xingting simply sent them a glare and said strictly, if you want to join a gaming workshop, be my guest. When the time comes, don't blame me for not warning you. Immediately, the crowd from the White Tiger Dojo fell silent. In all dojos, there were two kinds of disciples. The first kind had to pay an exorbitant fee to join and was usually there just to train their body and learn some combat techniques. The dojo didn't place them under any restrictions. The second kind was under contract. They were subject to relatively strict restrictions. However, they paid only a small fee or, depending on their rank, nothing at all to receive nurturing from the dojo. Disciples under this category were all aiming to become professional fighters, and they were more like contracted artists working for an agency. The White Tiger disciples who had come to the Big Dipper Dojo this time all fell under the latter category. They had undergone multiple examinations just to get accepted as a contracted disciple of the White Tiger Dojo. After all, the White Tiger Dojo was renowned in the industry, having produced many famous industry professionals. Just being able to get selected as a contracted disciple proved that one was already among the cream of the crop. If they were expelled from the White Tiger Dojo, the consequences would be unimaginable. Faced with that sort of pressure, everyone naturally no longer dared to harbor thoughts of joining the Zero Wing workshop. The White Tiger Dojo sure is overbearing. Their contracted disciples don't possess any freedom at all. If it were me, I wouldn't stay in such a dojo at all. It's not even a guarantee that I'd become a top-tier professional in the future. Sure enough, our dojo is much better. Aside from the usual training, we can do whatever we want during our free time. The disciples of the Big Dipper Dojo were shocked at the restrictions the White Tiger Dojo placed on its disciples. Previously, they still felt relatively envious of the White Tiger Dojo members. Now, however, rather than envious, they felt fortunate that they had not joined such a tyrannical dojo. Moreover, Shifeng had already assured them that anyone who managed to join Zero Wing's workshop would definitely gain significant improvements in the future. Not only would they be able to earn money, but they would also be able to improve their strength. Compared to joining the White Tiger Dojo, they would have a much better life staying at the Big Dipper Dojo and joining Zero Wing's workshop. When the White Tiger Dojo members heard the Big Dipper disciples' words, their complexions turned extremely ugly. At this moment, none of the pride they had before was evident on their faces. At the White Tiger Dojo members' silence, Shifeng simply smiled and said, "The choice is yours. I won't force you to make a decision. If you guys really want to join, you are welcome to come here and take the test anytime." Although the White Tiger Dojo's interference made it more difficult for him to poach Yu Zipping, now that the boy had come to Jinhai City, the White Tiger Dojo would naturally come into conflict with the Big Dipper Dojo. At that time, he would still have plenty of opportunities to scout Yu Zipping. Having already cast his bait, all he needed to do was wait patiently. As far as Shifeng knew, Yu Zipping had chosen to develop himself at the White Tiger Dojo because he liked the daughter of one of the White Tiger Dojo's branch heads. Unfortunately, this branch head had not favored Yu Zipping and had given her daughter to a genius fighter called Xie instead. Xie was very amazing. At just the young age of 25, he had already managed to qualify for an international fighting competition. Meanwhile, Yu Zipping had been a mere advanced disciple of the White Tiger Dojo back then, mingling only at the bottom ranks of national competitions. With such a great disparity between the two young men, it was obvious which person the branch head would choose. After that incident, Yu Zipping had left the White Tiger Dojo and joined the Super Guild Pantheon. Afterward, his achievements had skyrocketed. According to the current timeline, that branch head should not have given her daughter to anyone yet. Yu Zipping and Xie were still competing with each other for her hand. However, if Yu Zipping did not present any outstanding performances to that branch head, then trying to gain her daughter would definitely be a pipe dream. Currently, Xie was a big celebrity in the White Tiger Dojo. He was already a famous fighter on the national level. Yu Zipping simply stood no chance the way he was right now. If Yu Zipping wanted to have a fighting chance against Xie, then the opportunity to strengthen himself that Shifeng was extending to him was his only chance. Even if the current Yu Zipping did not wish to join Zero Wing, once he felt that he could not outcompete Xie, he would surely think back to the absolute strength fire dance showed today. At that time, he would naturally consider joining Zero Wing. Just as Gan Xingting thought that no one would dare to join the Zero Wing workshop, a White Tiger Dojo member suddenly raised his hand. "I want to take the test." Gan Xingting and the other White Tiger Dojo members promptly turned to look at the origin of this voice. The person speaking was a young man around 20 years old. To those aiming to become professional fighters, his body was slightly too thin. It was truly hard to imagine how such a person had managed to become an intermediate disciple of the White Tiger Dojo. "Lu Ping, have you lost your mind?" Yu Zipping was filled with shock as he turned to look at the young man currently taking care of him. In the White Tiger Dojo, Lu Ping's talent was considered merely average. The only reason he had managed to become an intermediate disciple was his having trained at the dojo for many years. Currently, he was already 21 years old, yet he had been promoted to an intermediate disciple just recently. He could also be considered one of the few friends Yu Ziping had in the White Tiger Dojo. Yu Ziping never imagined that Lu Ping would actually forsake his future at the White Tiger Dojo just to join a gaming workshop. Although Yu Ziping wanted to dissuade his friend, Lu Ping forestalled him. "I'm different from you. You are a genius, while I'm just an ordinary person. I know my own limits. It would be a miracle if I can even become an advanced disciple by the time I reach 30. Rather than continue walking on this path, I would rather take a gamble," Lu Ping explained. Hearing these words, Yu Ziping inwardly ridiculed himself. At the same time, he also understood that Lu Ping was firm on his decision. The other members of the White Tiger Dojo could more or less understand Lu Ping's feelings as well when they heard his explanation. Gan Xingting, however, had an extremely ugly expression on his face right now. He had originally come to the Big Dipper Dojo, representing the White Tiger Dojo, to humiliate the people here as well as poach some of its disciples. He had never imagined that he would end up on the receiving end of this plan. Instead, if news of this matter were to spread, the White Tiger Dojo's reputation would fall into ruin. Ha ha ha. Good. Very good. Gan Xingting could not help but laugh madly at this development. He then turned to Lu Ping and said, "I won't hold you back if you want to leave. However, you will definitely regret this decision in the future. We're leaving." Seeing that several more people in his group were starting to show signs of hesitation, he no longer dared to remain here any longer. He hurriedly called for everyone to leave the Big Dipper Dojo. At this time, Cola walked up to the somewhat dazed Lu Ping and patted the young man's shoulders. In a very welcoming tone, Cola then said, "Brother, I have high hopes for you. I can assure you that, if you manage to join the Zero Wing workshop, it will be, without a doubt, the wisest decision you make in this lifetime. I mean, take myself for example. Before I joined Zero Wing, I was far weaker than your current self. As long as you work hard, you will certainly become much stronger than you would ever be if you stayed in the White Tiger Dojo. May I know how long Big Brother has been with Zero Wing?" After Lu Ping took a close look at the tall and robust Cola, as well as considered the feeling he got when Cola had patted his shoulders, he could tell that Cola possessed immense physical strength. He estimated Cola's strength to be equal or above that of Gan Xingting's. After making a rough calculation, Cola answered honestly, "It's been roughly a month since I've started training officially." "Just over a month? And you say you were weaker than me before? You're not lying to me, right?" Lu Ping's eyes widened in shock. He simply could not believe Cola's words. Cola rolled his eyes at Lu Ping, feeling that the young man was getting overly excited over nothing. He then pointed to Fire Dance and the others and said, "Why would I lie to you? All of us here started taking part in the special training at the same time. If you don't believe me, ask them yourself." "That's right. All of us did indeed start training here only a month ago, more or less. And before Cola began the special training, he really was weaker than your current self." Fire Dance nodded and laughed. Hearing Fire Dance's confirmation, Lu Ping was immediately dumbfounded. Or to put it in another way, the amount of information was just too much for his brain to process. Right now, he felt as if he had wasted all his life training for nothing. Just what kind of place did he come to? Chapter 907 Strength Changes. Chapter 907 Strength Changes. After leaving the Big Dipper Dojo with miserable expressions, Gan Xingting and the other members of the White Tiger Dojo returned to the high-class hotel where they were temporarily lodging. Disregarding his injuries, Gan Xingting immediately reported what had happened at the Big Dipper Dojo to the main branch of the White Tiger Dojo upon arrival. "What did you say?" "There's an expert who's even stronger than you at the Big Dipper Dojo," the white-robed middle-aged man on the other side of the video call repeated in surprise. Could that person be that rumored internal force expert? Master Jiang, that head instructor called Shifeng, did not take action. The one who fought was a woman. Judging from her appearance, she should be around the same age as Shifeng. However, she is extremely powerful. Even Xie Chiwen would have difficulty defeating her. "I suspect that the real behind-the-scenes boss is that woman," Gan Xingting reported carefully as he looked at the man in the screen. "Moreover, I believe that the Big Dipper Dojo has plans similar to ours. Although Jiang Qianyuan, the man before him, was not the main dojo master of the White Tiger Dojo, he was still a very powerful branch master. The man had been famous for more than 20 years already. One should not take his appearance at face value. While he might look like someone in his mid-30s, in reality, he was already 50 years old this year. This is interesting. Even Xie Chiwen wouldn't be able to defeat her easily. It's no wonder the Big Dipper group has constantly been expanding its influence recently. But it doesn't matter. The mindset of that bunch from the Big Dipper group is too simple. What do they think they can accomplish with just one expert? Jiang Qianyuan laughed. I recall that Jinhai City is going to hold a citywide competition soon. I'll send Xie Chiwen and Tang Jingyaro to help you secure both male and female championship titles in Jinhai City. At that time, even if the Big Dipper Dojo tries to recruit members, it won't be able to outmatch us. For the moment, just focus on properly dealing with the matters of the branch dojo. Understood. Gan Xingting nodded hurriedly, shock filling his heart. He had never imagined that Jiang Qianyuan would get so serious as to actually send both Xie Chiwen and Tang Jingyaro over. The two of them were the pride of the White Tiger Dojo. Both of them usually took part only in national-level competitions, and they were also very famous fighters within the country. Having them participate in such a small competition was simply a waste of time. At that time, a commotion would definitely arise in Jinhai City. As long as those two people took action, none of the other dojos in Jinhai City would have any hopes of securing the championship title. Inside the Big Dipper Dojo, Shi Feng had fire dance and the others preside over the assessment of the new applicants. Meanwhile, Shi Feng himself discussed with Liang Jing the matters of recruitment and advertising for Zero Wing's workshop. Shi Feng's approach to these problems was simple: advertising through the Big Dipper Training Center's connections. The advertisement would state that Zero Wing was trying to recruit internal elites, as well as some application conditions such as only men and women below the age of 25 were allowed to apply. It was simply a recruitment advertisement. Originally, Liang Jing thought that even if a gaming workshop utilized Big Dipper's connections to disseminate an advertisement, there would not be many applicants. Although the application conditions Shi Feng proposed were not particularly strict, the criteria for passing the assessment itself was very high. As proof of this, only 10% of the disciples of the Big Dipper Dojo had managed to pass the assessment, and every single one of these disciples had been handpicked by Big Dipper. If ordinary people, who only exercised occasionally, were to apply to the Zero Wing workshop, it would be great if even 1% managed to pass the assessment. Moreover, the treatment Shi Feng offered was only average at best. She expected that anyone who saw the advertised benefits would directly give up on applying altogether. However, when the next day arrived, everyone in the Big Dipper Training Center was stupefied. There were actually tens of thousands of people swarming into the Big Dipper Training Center, every one of them wishing to take Zero Wing's test. These people had very nearly destroyed the entrance of the training center. The lively scene was even more exaggerated than Jinhai City's annual fighting competition. Meanwhile, the only thing these people talked about as they filled the hallways of the Big Dipper Training Center was Zero Wing, their eyes filled with excitement and admiration as they spoke. In Liang Jing's opinion, these people had all lost their minds. Since when did Big Dipper possess such powerful advertising capabilities? With this, there would be no need to run any training center or dojo. Big Dipper could simply start an advertising company and make a fortune. Wasn't Zero Wing just a gaming workshop? It was not as if these people were applying to join one of the Fortune 500 companies. When Xiao Yu found out about this flood of visitors, he thought that a major incident had occurred at Big Dipper. As a result, even though he resided in another city, he hurriedly took a flight back to Jinhai City. When he arrived at the Big Dipper Training Center and heard what the crowd was discussing, his mind stopped completely. He had never imagined that a game like God's Domain could actually garner such popularity as well as possess such massive influence. Previously, he still considered God's Domain to be like any other game. Even if those major corporations invested in it, they were only doing so to raise their prestige and help promote the game. Now, however, it would seem that was not the case. It looks like I'll have to find some time to have a discussion with Shifeng. At this moment, Xiao Yu finally understood why Shifeng was so intent on playing a virtual reality game. Otherwise, with the young man's abilities, he could easily become a star in the world of fighting. Meanwhile, the large number of applicants also made the extremely confident White Tiger Dojo impatient. Just what kind of trick did they pull? Why are all these people trying to join that place? No matter how many times Gan Xingting looked through Zero Wing's flyer, he could not figure out why so many people were trying to join Zero Wing's workshop. Meanwhile, the instructions from the White Tiger Dojo's main headquarters were also very simple: speed up the construction of the branch dojo. At the same time, the main headquarters also withdrew some funds to start advertising as well, refusing to believe that they could not outcompete Big Dipper with the fame of the White Tiger Dojo. After learning of the White Tiger Dojo's actions, Liang Jing suggested Shifeng either increase his scope of advertising or reduce the difficulty of the assessment. However, Shifeng rejected her suggestions. In his opinion, the people of the White Tiger Dojo were truly fools. He was currently recruiting members for a gaming workshop, not a dojo. No matter how much the White Tiger Dojo advertised itself, it would not affect his recruitment campaign in any way. Following which, Shifeng handed over all the tasks related to the recruitment to Liang Jing to handle, which kept her extremely busy. Not only did she have to go through the applications of tens of thousands of people as well as manage their assessments, but crowds of new applicants also continued coming in every day. If she did not mobilize every staff member of Big Dipper, she would have died from overwork already. Fortunately, becoming an internal elite of Zero Wing was not easy, and the passing rate of the assessment was exceedingly low. At the moment, the passing rate was not even 1%. As for Shifeng himself, he continued training at the battle tower. At the same time, he shared some of his battle points with Fire Dance and the others, allowing them to fight with the simulated experts for long periods of time. During the 2 days that God's Domain system update took to finish, Fire Dance and the others received massive improvements. Violet Cloud, in particular, had finally set foot into the refinement realm after training at the battle tower, becoming Zero Wing's third expert to set foot into the realms of refinement. As for everyone else, they had all reached the half-step refinement realm standard already. When Big Sis Aqua finds out about this, she will most likely be very shocked at our improvement speed during this period, Violet Cloud said over the public channel, after entering her virtual gaming cabin, her heart full of anticipation as she prepared to log into God's Domain. Oh, right. Guild leader, please don't tell Big Sis Aqua about this matter right after you log in. She was always bullying me before. This time, I must give her a surprise. Sure, Shifeng laughed as he shook his head. After Aqua Rose obtained her epic staff, although she was still a bit inferior to Violet Cloud in terms of techniques, she became far superior in terms of basic attributes. As a result, when the two sparred with each other, Violet Cloud was usually the one who got the worst of it. After you guys log in, gather at White River City. I have something important to tell you all. In addition, there is also the matter of these newcomers. Following which, when the countdown timer for God's Domain system upgrade ended, everyone logged into the game simultaneously. Chapter 908, 3-Star Shop. Chapter 908 3-Star Shop. _ As soon as Shifeng returned to God's Domain after 40 hours of waiting, the sound of a system notification entered his ears. System, the environment of the area you are in has changed. System, you have 30 seconds of invulnerability to look for a safe zone. Isn't this transformation a little too much? Shifeng was surprised as he observed his surroundings. At this moment, the previously lush, green valley was nothing more than scorched earth. He could even faintly see streams of magma flowing nearby. This place had already turned into a volcanic hell. When the waves of hot air blew over Shifeng, even with his high fire resistance, his skin still registered a burning sensation. The pungent smell in the air was almost unbearable. After God's Domain underwent its fourth evolution, the 5 senses of players had evidently become much more acute. As a result, such severe external environments would have a greater impact on the combat power of players. Likewise, monsters also had their senses heightened. With their enhanced senses, monsters would now have significantly greater perception ranges. This change was extremely disadvantageous for players who grinded at night. After all, while players would have their acuity reduced at night, monsters would not. Now that the senses of monsters were sharper, most likely, players would be under attack even before they could detect these monsters. This change was a nightmare, particularly for players who were usually active in high-level maps, which were already very dangerous to adventure in the first place. Now, things just became even more dangerous. Although Shifeng had already chosen a safe zone to set up a teleportation point before he logged out, with such drastic changes to the environment, his previously safe zone was now infested with extremely fierce level 40 monsters. If not for the invulnerability provided by the system, he would have long since become dinner for these monsters. He immediately activated Wind Rider and continued searching for a safe zone to set up a teleportation point. After looking for about half an hour or so, he finally found an elevated location for the teleportation point. He also set up a protective barrier using the ancient Abyssal Book. Aside from the monsters that were originally in the valley, one could also frequently see abyssal monsters flying overhead. These monsters were much higher leveled than those residing in the valley, with the lowest being level 80. To current players, these monsters were practically invincible existences. Without the barrier set up using the ancient Abyssal Book, any player that came here would only become food for the abyssal monsters. However, it was also thanks to these abyssal monsters that he could get an opportunity to make a fortune. Eventually, he would only need to pay out some magic crystals in order to rake in large sums of coins. After he was done with all of his tasks here, Shifeng took out a return scroll and left the valley. At White River City, Shifeng discovered that the city's defensive magic array had already been activated as soon as he walked out of the teleportation hall. There were also thousands of abyssal monsters hovering about in the air beyond the magic array, with the lowest leveled among them being level 180 and the highest being level 200 Grand Lords. With the appearance of such terrifying monsters, the atmosphere within White River City had become subdued. The players walking around the street all felt extremely stressed, all of them fearing that the defensive magic array in the sky would suddenly crumble. We're doomed this time. With so many monsters here, will our White River City be captured as well? That can't be possible, right? Although White River City is not comparable to the capital, it is still a major city in the kingdom's eastern region. If even White River City falls, won't the surrounding cities fare even worse? When everyone thought about the gigantic monsters flying in the sky above the city, their scalps involuntarily numbed. In this situation, they couldn't grind and level up within the region of White River City. At the same time, the guilds based in the eastern region of Star Moon Kingdom were also holding urgent meetings one after another. The various guilds had initially believed that the Abyss invasion would only affect the Twin Towers Kingdom. They never thought that it would embroil the surrounding countries as well. Now, these guilds had no choice but to decide whether or not they should relocate to another city. However, the consequences of doing so were something that no guild could accept. It had taken them a lot of time and resources to establish themselves in their current respective cities. If they were to leave the city they controlled and choose to start developing all over again in another city, the cost of doing so would be much higher than the first time. The number 2 guild in Star Moon Kingdom's eastern region, Overwhelming Smile, was currently extremely busy. Over 100 people were seated inside its spacious meeting room. These people were all members of Overwhelming Smile's upper echelon, and they were existences that ordinary players would rarely get to meet. Ha ha ha. The timing of these abyssal monsters is simply impeccable. I want to see just how Zero Wing is going to continue strutting around in this situation. Feng Shenyang could not help but smile when he received the latest report. Based on the information from Underworld, the eastern region of Star Moon Kingdom wasn't the only part of the kingdom affected by the Abyss invasion. These abyssal monsters were already showing signs of spreading throughout the entire realm. By the time that happened, it would be relatively dangerous for players to go out and grind. Along with this report, the upper echelon of Underworld had also given the command for Overwhelming Smile to move its elites temporarily to the Black Dragon Empire, which did not receive any harassment from the abyssal monsters. Underworld's influence spread across multiple kingdoms. A pause in its operations in Star Moon Kingdom would not affect the entire organization too significantly. It definitely possessed the ability to transfer its elites to the cities of other kingdoms and empires that were under its control. Small and upstart guilds with no background, on the other hand, did not possess this ability. These guilds generally had their foundations in only one country and could not afford to move their base of operations in a hurry. Even if they did relocate, they would have to start from scratch. However, how could these guilds compete in a foreign city against the entrenched local guilds, which had already developed for months? For Zero Wing, the tyrant of Star Moon Kingdom, things were even more severe. The amount of capital and number of advantages it would lose by migrating its base of operations would be unbearable even for a first-rate guild. With such a loss, Zero Wing's development would no doubt suffer a significant setback. When that happened, it would be nearly impossible for the guild to catch up to the major powers of God's domain. In contrast to Feng Xuanyang's joyful reaction, Yulan currently had a slight frown on her face. Zero Wing is really unlucky, but I guess this is also part of life. Yulan could not help but sigh inwardly. Zero Wing's rise was already a legend in Star Moon Kingdom. Ultimately, however, it couldn't save itself from falling due to external factors. Who could have possibly imagined that the system would play such a trick? This development had thoroughly ruined Zero Wing. Of course, Yulan was also feeling very fortunate about the appearance of the abyssal monsters. This invasion was both a disaster and an opportunity. Currently, due to the abyssal monsters, the players belonging to countries neighboring the Twin Towers kingdoms would definitely shift to other kingdoms and empires. Moreover, the possibility of players migrating to the Black Dragon Empire was the greatest. With so many players swarming into the Black Dragon Empire, the player population of the cities there would naturally soar. Hence, the market there for items would expand in spades. If she could nurture a batch of her own advanced lifestyle players now, her authority in Underworld would surely grow as well. Thinking up to this point, Yulan could not help but wish she could take action sooner. At this time, every minute and second was money. Unfortunately, while today should have been the day they went to the holy city of Titan, due to the system upgrade, the operation had been delayed. While every guild was busy holding meetings and deciding on how they should develop in the future, Shifeng himself arrived at the city hall of White River City. "How may I help you, sir?" the NPC beauty standing behind the VIP counter asked with a smile. In response, he calmly took out a purple gold, diamond-shaped token and said, "I wish to upgrade the Candlelight Trading Firm into a 3-star shop." Chapter 909 Shocking Star Moon Kingdom. Chapter 909 Shocking Star Moon Kingdom. After the female receptionist accepted the purple gold token and confirmed that there were no problems, she looked at Shifeng and said, "Sir, if you wish to promote your shop to 3-star status, you still have to pay an additional 3,000 gold reconstruction fee." Without hesitation, Shifeng handed 3,000 gold over to the receptionist. Previously, he had been busy with setting up a teleportation point. There had also been the matter of the mutated dragon. Back then, he simply had no time to check how much he had earned from the Blackwing auction house. Although Shifeng had spent 20,000 gold to purchase the engineering locomotive design from Sindhart, the 5,000 strengthening devices he sold at Blackwing City had made him a fortune. After deducting all the miscellaneous fees, he currently had close to 30,000 gold coins sitting in his pockets right now. If those first-rate guilds were to learn of this, they would definitely be green with envy. In truth, Shifeng had never imagined that the strengthening devices would be so welcome. The final 1,500 devices sold at a minimum price of 13 gold 15 silver. The combat guilds at Blackwing City had gone nuts over the devices. It's a pity that the number of people who can produce the strengthening device is limited. Otherwise, with just the strengthening device, I could probably earn enough money to construct a city, Shifeng sighed inwardly. While the strengthening device forging design itself was already extremely rare, the forgers capable of producing the item at a profitable rate were even rarer. As a result, the number of designs he had on hand was much more than the number of forgers he had who were capable of producing the item right now. As players reached higher levels, their chances of obtaining the strengthening device forging design would rise. As the number of strengthening devices on the market increased, its price would definitely fall. By then, it would be very good if he could sell one for 8 or 9 gold. In another few months' time, even selling a strengthening device for 5 gold would be an extravagant dream. After Shi Feng paid the fees and completed all the necessary procedures, as soon as he walked out of the city hall's entrance and was about to head back to the guild residence, a commotion broke out among players on the street. Did you hear? The candlelight trading firm's shop has transformed again. Transformed? Could there be a new product? No, that's not it. The entire trading firm itself has undergone a transformation. Before, it was only a 5-story building. Now, it is 7 stories tall. Currently, it is only second to the NPC-operated Starstreak trading firm in terms of floors. What? Aren't the number of floors for shops fixed? That's right. That's why everyone suspects that Candlelight's shop has been promoted to a 3-star shop. What? Even the Black Dragon Empire had a 2-star shop appear in its imperial capital only recently. How can the Candlelight trading firm possibly upgrade to a 3-star shop so quickly? News of the Candlelight trading firm obtaining a 3-star shop spread like wildfire. Very quickly, every guild in the entire Starmoon Kingdom had found out about it. This incident completely offset the depression and silence brought on by the abyssal monsters. Just what is Zero Wing thinking? The abyssal monsters have already started to spread throughout the entire kingdom. White River City is even under siege right now. To upgrade a shop in White River City to 3 stars, isn't Zero Wing throwing good money after bad? Doesn't Zero Wing know that players have already begun migrating to other kingdoms and empires? Rather than constructing a 3-star shop in a city with a rapidly decreasing population, they might as well construct it in a small city in the Black Dragon Empire. When the various guilds received this news, their first reaction was to comment on Zero Wing's foolishness. Meanwhile, the guild that was the most excited about this news was naturally Overwhelming Smile, Zero Wing's longtime rival. Some guilds that wished to overtake Zero Wing also got a kick out of this development. Ha ha ha. Zero Wing is done for this time. It won't be able to rise back up even if it wanted to now. Initially, when Feng Shenyang received news of the Candlelight trading firm's promotion, he had been both shocked and envious. Overwhelming Smile had yet to possess even a single 2-star shop up to now, yet the Candlelight trading firm already had a 3-star shop. Shortly after, however, he started gloating over Zero Wing's misfortune. If not for the invasion of the abyssal monsters, the fact that the Candlelight trading firm possessed a 3-star shop would have indeed dealt a heavy blow to Overwhelming Smile's overwhelming trading firm. With the special workshop of 2-star shops as an example, even a fool could imagine just how many more additional benefits a 3-star shop could bring. Even a meager increase in the number of special workshops would still greatly enhance the Candlelight trading firm's ability to nurture lifestyle players. In the current God's domain, economic battles between guilds were becoming increasingly important. This change in trend also led to Feng Shenyang loathing Yulan to the extreme. He deeply regretted not contesting for the rights of the overwhelming trading firm, allowing Yulan to obtain them, instead. Right now, Yulan was already a very important figure in Underworld, even he had to treat her with respect. Before Shi Feng even walked into Zero Wing's residence, he could already hear the merriment coming from inside. Just moments ago, Melancholic Smile had even directly contacted Shi Feng to report every functionality of the Candlelight trading firm's new 3-star shop, her voice bubbling with excitement. Although the building itself had increased by only 2 floors, the difference between the functions of a 2-star shop and 3-star shop made Melancholic Smile think that she was dreaming. That was right, dreaming. In order to develop itself, the Candlelight trading firm had recruited many lifestyle players. Some of the new hires had very good potential. The only thing they lacked was experience. Unfortunately, the Candlelight trading firm had only 5 special workshops. With 3 rooms reserved exclusively for Melancholic Smile, Cream Cocoa, and Roasted Ironheart, only 2 were left for the others to use in turn and increase their production experience. With this, the amount of time allotted for each lifestyle player was not calculated in hours or days, but in minutes. Generally, a lifestyle player with good potential would have roughly 30 minutes to learn and train inside a special workshop, once every several days. Now, they had a total of 12 special workshops. Aside from the 3 reserved, they now had 9 special workshops for those with excellent potential to use. This would increase their efficiency over 4-fold. Finally, there was the basic meditation room, which was what truly shocked Melancholic Smile. Out of curiosity, she had spent 300 magic crystals to activate the room. Although the price was indeed costly, the effects of the room left her speechless. While inside the meditation room, her mind experienced a calm like never before. In that calm state, even the most complicated production procedures became very simple for her. As a result, her production success rate had risen by roughly 10%, while her production speed had improved by at least 30% as well. Although this improvement might not seem like much, to lifestyle players like herself who frequently produced items, this improvement was extremely staggering. Currently, items that could raise production success rate by just 1% were selling for astronomical prices. Something that could offer an increase of 10% would be priceless. There was also the improvement in production speed. Not to mention spending 300 magic crystals a day, even spending 500 crystals would be worth it so long as the meditation room was used to produce high-value items. If it were used only for items such as advanced whetstones, they would never be able to make up for the cost of using the room. Shifeng only gave some simple instructions regarding the meditation rooms and special workshops. At the same time, he also had Melancholic Smile start recruiting more lifestyle players from the general public. The 4th evolution of God's domain was not as simple as it appeared to be. Rather than the combat system, the lifestyle production system was the part that had truly evolved. Soon, lifestyle players would play a pivotal role in God's domain, just like combat players. Otherwise, a master forger wouldn't have attained such a high standing in society in the past, to the point where even the guild leader of a second-rate guild like himself had to treat them with respect. Back then, even the members of Shadow's board of directors had treated the guild's master forgers like their own babies. Chapter 9-10 Killing Multiple Birds with One Stone. Chapter 9-10 Killing Multiple Birds with One Stone. While the candlelight trading firm was causing a huge commotion. Over 100 people were currently gathered inside the meeting room of Zero Wing's guild residence. Every person present was a core member of Zero Wing. Not only did everyone possess very high levels, but even the equipment they wore could easily make expert players of God's domain envious. While the general public considered level 35 dark gold equipment rare, it was just basic equipment for them. As for their combat standards, every one of them could easily reach the 5th floor of the trial tower or higher. Experts capable of reaching the trial tower's 5th floor could easily become a first-rate expert in a city with a player population of over 100,000. Nevertheless, all these experts were gazing at the figure seated on the guild leader's throne with eyes filled with reverence and shock. The reason for their reverence was the identity of the man before them. He was a legendary character who had single-handedly established Zero Wing and developed the upstart guild to its current overbearing state. The man was even the publicly acknowledged #1 expert of Star Moon Kingdom, and until now, he still maintained his indomitable record. As for the reason for their shock when they looked at Shifeng, it was his level. At this moment, Shifeng had not done anything to hide his level. As long as one paid a little attention, they would be able to see it. Level 42. Even the current top players in Empires were only level 39 at best. They were also still relatively far from reaching level 40. Previously, when Fire Dance and the others had revealed themselves to be at level 40, the other core members had already been flabbergasted. Although there was just a difference of 1 level between them and the top players of Empires, the amount of EXP required to cross this gap was massive. Now, Shifeng was even more terrifying. He was actually 2 levels higher than Fire Dance and the others. Not to mention the other core members present, even Fire Dance and her team were staggered. After all, when they had last met, Shifeng was only level 40. In just a short time, Shifeng had actually managed to pull ahead of them by 2 levels. His leveling speed was simply ludicrous. Guild leader, Everyone's here already, Aqua Rose said softly to Shifeng after checking the entire meeting room. Nodding, Shifeng swept a glance at everyone present and said seriously, I've asked you all to gather here for two matters. The first matter is that Zero Wing is going to start branching out and developing at the Twin Towers Kingdom and the Black Dragon Empire. The exact locations where we'll be setting up the branches have also been determined already. When the time comes, I'll have you all split up to these two locations. I'll also set up a new main force in both of these locations. As for who will become part of this main force, I'll be choosing them from the guild's elite members. Of course, you all can put in your recommendations as well. The treatment provided will be the same as Star Moon Kingdom's main force. Truthfully speaking, Shifeng did not wish to develop outwards so quickly. However, now that God's domain had experienced its fourth evolution, the economic war involving lifestyle classes had also officially begun. Even if he did not wish to develop Zero Wing in other kingdoms, he had no choice but to do so. Without sufficient resources, it would be impossible for them to contend against other large guilds. Before Shifeng was done speaking, everyone present had already fallen into a daze. Even Aqua Rose, the vice leader of Zero Wing, was shocked at this news. Although Zero Wing expanding to other countries was something that was bound to happen sooner or later, she had never imagined that that day would come so quickly, or to put it in another way, they had long since grown impatient waiting for the arrival of this day. Currently, Zero Wing simply had too many members. While playing virtual reality games, guilds always had one big problem to face: the limited amount of resources in an area. If a guild wished to develop and grow stronger, it needed to secure more resource-rich areas for itself. Otherwise, sooner or later, it would face resource deprivation due to their constantly increasing member count. Then, the amount of resources each guild member could receive would decrease, which would affect the overall development speed of the guild members. This problem was also the reason why first-rate guilds would spread their roots throughout multiple kingdoms and empires. The influence of the major powers of the virtual gaming world spanned several dozens of countries. However, one thing that confused everyone was Shifeng's choice to develop at the Twin Towers Kingdom and the Black Dragon Empire. Setting aside how muddy the waters were at the Black Dragon Empire and the fact that the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was Zero Wing's enemy, just the Twin Towers Kingdom was already a huge problem. The Twin Towers Kingdom was infested with abyssal monsters. The players living there were scrambling to leave, yet Zero Wing was actually choosing to charge into the kingdom. The situation in the Twin Towers Kingdom was much more severe than Star Moon Kingdom's. There was simply no way for them to level up there. Just how were they supposed to develop themselves? Guild leader, abyssal monsters have already conquered the Twin Towers Kingdom. Why don't we consider developing at the Purple Thorns Kingdom, the kingdom west of Star Moon Kingdom? The abyssal monsters haven't reached there. Moreover, the two first-rate guilds in that kingdom have constantly been at each other's necks all this time. With our guild's strength, we can easily make a place for ourselves there. In addition, the Purple Thorns Kingdom is rich in herbs. Our guild will have a much easier time procuring herbs if we develop there, Aqua Rose suggested hurriedly. She had long since made ample preparations regarding Zero Wing's development, only she never bothered making suggestions, as Shifeng had always said that the time was not right yet. The candlelight trading firm was the largest source of economic power for Zero Wing. With the Purple Thorns Kingdom's abundance of herbs, they could definitely advance the candlelight trading firm a step further. They would no longer have to rely on external sources to obtain their herbs. If they developed properly, they could definitely achieve self-sufficiency in herbs and greatly reduce the expenses of the candlelight trading firm. The players in the room voiced their agreement with Aqua Rose's suggestion one after another. The current combat power of Zero Wing's elite members was in no way inferior to a first-rate guild's. In addition, they also had quite a number of experts in the guild now. Even if they sent only a portion of their forces, they should not have any problem handling the threats present in the Purple Thorns Kingdom. Moreover, Zero Wing already possessed several plots of land in the cities of the Purple Thorns Kingdom. With this foundation, they would be able to construct a guild residence in that kingdom right away. One could say that the Purple Thorns Kingdom was the best option by far. While the Purple Thorns Kingdom is indeed a good option, The Twin Towers Kingdom is much better, Shifeng replied, shaking his head. Better? All the core members were filled with questions as they looked at Shifeng. They simply could not figure out what exactly was good about branching out to a place infested with abyssal monsters. I know that you all are worried about the abyssal monsters, but that is also the greatest opportunity for Zero Wing. Shifeng naturally understood everyone's worries. In their shoes, he, too, would have chosen to branch out to the Purple Thorns Kingdom. However, he now had both the ancient abyssal book and the teleportation magic array in his possession. Regarding the threat of powerful abyssal monsters, he could just set up multiple barriers and allow his guild members to grind at high-resource maps safely. There was also no need to worry about other guilds and players coming to contest for those locations. In addition, they could also gain honor points by killing low-level abyssal monsters. Now that the guilds originally residing in the Twin Towers Kingdom had left, although the lands of the kingdom's capital remained in the hands of these guilds, as long as Zero Wing paid some coins, it could still buy 1 or 2 plots of land located near the heart of the city without any difficulty. Had he chosen to branch out to other kingdoms, Zero Wing couldn't even dream of obtaining the central lands of the top 10 major cities in these kingdoms, much less the central lands of the capital city. Nobody would be willing to sell them anything at all. Even if there was a willing seller, that price would not be one that Zero Wing would be willing to bear. Furthermore, the Twin Towers Kingdom was a country of ore. In terms of ore-related resources, it was only slightly inferior to the Storm Empire. At the end of the day, the Candlelight trading firm focused mainly on forging. Ore was something that it could not lack. Hence, developing at the Twin Towers Kingdom was akin to killing multiple birds with one stone. Following which, Shifeng cleverly hid the matter of the ancient abyssal book, simply telling everyone that he had discovered many special areas not assaulted by the abyssal monsters. Afterwards, as long as he set up teleportation points at these locations, they would be able to level up without worrying about abyssal monsters or other players, essentially turning those locations into Zero Wing's backyard. When they heard Shifeng's reason, everyone's eyes sparkled, anticipation filling their hearts. Nobody present was a noob. They knew full well just how valuable an uncontested high-resource map was. Otherwise, the various large guilds would not fight over these high-resource maps. However, no one knew that Shifeng had actually concealed another important reason for his choice to develop at the Twin Towers Kingdom. The large-scale regional dungeon, Tower of Time. Chapter 911, Tower of Time. Chapter 911, Tower of Time. The Twin Towers Kingdom was named such because of its 2 ancient towers within the kingdom's boundaries. These ancient towers had existed in God's domain for a long time, their age could no longer be verified. Among these 2 towers, one was the Tower of Time. It was also the Twin Towers Kingdom's sole, large-scale regional dungeon. Like the dungeon in the Stoneclaw Mountains, this dungeon was set to Azura mode. However, the Tower of Time's level was much higher, thus it was more difficult to raid. Meanwhile, the Tower of Time's fame throughout God's domain had not only been due to its abundance of magic crystals, but its bosses also had a chance of dropping the 7 Luminaries crystals. The level requirement just to enter the Tower of Time was level 50. In the past, when mainstream players had been around level 50, the Mind Space system had not yet launched in God's domain. As a result, everyone had treated the Tower of Time like an ordinary regional dungeon that produced large quantities of magic crystals. Even when people killed the many bosses inside the dungeon and obtained the 7 Luminaries crystal, nobody knew their true value. The various large guilds had simply treated as the 7 Luminaries crystal as a high-end item to use or trade. Only after the Mind Space system launched did everyone realize their blunder. The guilds that used or traded their 7 Luminaries crystal had nearly choked to death with anger. Regional dungeons all had level limits that prevented anyone below or above a certain level from entering. When the Mind Space system had been introduced, God's domain had been operating for over a year. Players' average level had already been beyond the Tower of Time's limit of level 70. Hence, it had been practically impossible for guilds to rely on their main forces to grind the bosses for 7 Luminaries crystals. Meanwhile, when one wanted to enter the Tower of Time, aside from the level requirement, one needed a spacetime crystal. A single spacetime crystal could allow 100 players into the Tower of Time. However, only the monsters near the tower dropped the spacetime crystals, and its drop rate wasn't very high. This greatly restricted the number of players who could enter the dungeon. In this life, before everyone knew the importance of the Tower of Time, Shifeng intended to take advantage of the situation and grind for spacetime crystals. Once Zero Wing's core members reached level 50, they could get a head start over the other guilds, raiding the Tower of Time. After Shifeng explained his plans for the guild's expansion to everyone, he continued with notifying everyone about Zero Wing's preparation to nurture a large batch of internal experts. Guild leader, if we try to recruit members now, it will be far less effective than our past recruitment campaigns. After all, nobody knows if White River City will hold off the abyssal monsters. Moreover, even if the magic array holds, it is still extremely dangerous for players to go out to level up. On the off chance that one encounters a high-level abyssal monster, a team wipe is practically a guarantee. Based on my investigation, a portion of players have already moved to the Black Dragon Empire. Moreover, many of our guild members are worried about this crisis. This really isn't a good time to recruit members. We would be better off holding a mass recruitment campaign after we secure a foothold in the Black Dragon Empire. It would be more effective to wait. Saying so, Aqua Rose handed Shifeng a statistics report, which clearly displayed White River City's situation. Due to the abyssal monsters, the city's teleportation fee had been temporarily removed. Currently, over 5% of White River City's player population had relocated. Among these players, the majority had migrated to the Black Dragon Empire. As time passed, more players would relocate to continue their development. Don't worry about it. Start preparing for recruitment and assessment work. We will soon make up for those who chose to head elsewhere to develop, Shifeng said as he read the report. The situation was much better than his initial prediction. Make up for? Aqua Rose was slightly confused. However, since Shifeng had already spoken, she did not probe into the matter any further. She trusted Shifeng's judgment. Shifeng simply smiled at Aqua Rose's confusion. He then issued further instructions regarding the recruitment campaign. Everyone's worries about the abyssal monsters capturing the city were unnecessary. The Abyss Passage had been activated in the Twin Towers Kingdom. The powerful NPCs guarding the border had held back most of the strongest abyssal monsters. As for the remaining powerful abyssal monsters, almost all of them were busy besieging the various major cities. Hence, when the players belonging to the neighboring kingdoms and empires ventured out to level up, they just needed to be a little more careful of their surroundings. Things were not so severe that their livelihoods in their countries had been severed. This was just like an addition of several bosses, which should not be provoked, in everyone's leveling maps. The Abyss invasion was not as severe as everyone thought. On the contrary, due to the temporarily removed teleportation fees in affected cities, players now had more affordable leveling spots to choose from. Moreover, even if everyone failed to notice this, he could stealthily spread the message himself. In addition, there would soon be a teleportation array linked to a grinding area in the Twin Towers Kingdom. By then, the countless players who wanted to change classes would swarm to White River City. They didn't need to worry about a lack of players in the city. Once the teleportation array was set up, they also wouldn't need to worry about lacking development funds. As Shifeng arranged for Blackie to lead the Dark Gods Legion's elites to power level the newcomers from the Big Dipper dojo, Aqua Rose approached and whispered, "Guild leader, Miss Phoenix Rain has arrived and is waiting in the reception room. She says that she has brought what you requested. She's finally here." Shifeng nodded. He then left the remaining matters to Aqua Rose while he met Phoenix Rain. Inside the elegant, stunning reception room, Phoenix Rain sat quietly by the windowsill, a black cloak draped over her back. When Shifeng entered the room, her gaze promptly moved away from the Zero Wing members walking around the first-floor hall and to Shifeng. Level 42. Phoenix Rain was stunned. Currently, she knew of several people who had reached level 40 in the Empire. However, these people had used special methods to achieve their level. Take herself for example. She was an elementalist. Not only had she learned several AoE attack spells, but she also had a large number of elite members to assist her leveling progress. Her leveling speed was already fast. However, even now, she was over 30% away from reaching level 40, yet Shifeng had already reached level 42. Phoenix Pavilion Master, may I see the Lake Heart City's deed? Shifeng asked. He smiled in response to Phoenix Rain's surprise. Here, take a look. Phoenix Rain quickly recovered her composure and took out a deed for a land in Lake Heart City. This is the only deed I can give you. Even if you're not satisfied, I cannot change it. Not bad. Although it cannot compare to a golden land, it still has relatively high potential, Shifeng said with satisfaction after examining the deed. With this deed, Zero Wing could secure a foothold in the Black Dragon Empire. What followed next would depend on how things progressed on Melancholic Smile's side. Once they were ready, Zero Wing would officially start pushing its way into the Black Dragon Empire. Elsewhere, a large crowd of players had gathered before the 7-story-tall candlelight trading firm. It was even more lively than during normal times. While many among the crowd were lifestyle players, the majority consisted of sightseers. After all, nobody had ever seen a 3-star shop before. They were all quite curious about the differences between a 3-star shop and a 2-star shop. This was especially true for lifestyle players. Not long ago, the candlelight trading firm had published a shocking message. The candlelight trading firm was currently recruiting lifestyle players, regardless of rank. It did not care if one was an apprentice, who had just started, or someone far along the path of their lifestyle. As long as they could pass the simple entrance test, they could become an official member of the candlelight trading firm. High achievers would even get the opportunity to improve themselves in the special workshop. This was a benefit that could not be found anywhere else throughout the entire Starmoon Kingdom and even God's domain. After all, special workshops were simply too rare. Most trading firms only allowed their most skilled and trustworthy members to utilize their limited special workshops. Ordinary people had no hope of enjoying this particular benefit. Chapter 912, Bottomless Candlelight Trading Firm. Chapter 912, Bottomless Candlelight Trading Firm. Chapter 912, Bottomless Candlelight Trading Firm. The news of the candlelight trading firm mass recruiting lifestyle players spread like wildfire. It wasn't just limited to White River City. Very quickly, everyone throughout Starmoon Kingdom heard about the opportunity. The official forums buzzed with activity. What? This can't be true, right? The candlelight trading firm is actually recruiting members without any rank restrictions. I heard that Candlelight wants to recruit a lot of people this time. I wonder if an intermediate apprentice like myself has a chance. I remember that, when Heaven's Burial recruited lifestyle players, applicants needed to be at least advanced apprentice rank with a 65% success rate or higher to pass their assessment. However, Heaven's Burial still doesn't have a 2-star shop. Candlelight's assessment will probably be extremely difficult. Currently, lifestyle players grew more important by the day. However, it was extremely difficult for a lifestyle player to make a name for themselves if they had to rely on their own strength. This was because lifestyle players needed a lot of resources for their practice. The more important a lifestyle class was, the more resources they needed to improve. Moreover, the further a lifestyle player progressed, the more valuable were their required resources. Hence, if a lifestyle player did not join a guild, it would become extremely difficult for them to grow stronger. Just hours after the candlelight trading firm announced its recruitment campaign, thousands of players had lined up outside the firm's 3-star shop in White River City, and the crowd was still growing. Melancholic Smile arranged for these lifestyle players to take the firm's assessment, one after another. The test was very simple. Lifestyle players were required to produce a tool or item corresponding to their ranks, and they would be given a pass as long as they achieved a success rate of above 60%. What, exactly, is Zero Wing trying to do? When the various large guilds heard the news, they immediately assumed that Zero Wing had gone nuts. Although lifestyle players were important, one needed to invest a lot of resources to nurture profitable lifestyle players. Moreover, A loss was guaranteed during the early nurturing stages. Hence, when guilds like themselves recruited lifestyle players, they set their requirements very high and would only recruit a limited number. Otherwise, the expenditure would do more harm than good. Yet, not only was Zero Wing recruiting lifestyle players regardless of rank, but it had also significantly lowered the assessment's difficulty. During Zero Wing's previous recruitment campaigns for lifestyle players, it had required a success rate of 70% or higher. In just half an hour, Zero Wing had recruited over 30 lifestyle players. Among them, only 7 were advanced apprentice rank, while the others were below that. This outcome worried the lifestyle players still outside of the candlelight trading firm. They were afraid that the available slots would be taken up before their turn arrived. Contrary to expectations, however, more lifestyle players were accepted. Very quickly, over 100 players had been accepted into the firm. However, the candlelight trading firm showed no signs of stopping its recruitment. Seeing this, the spies the various guilds had sent reported this information to their respective guilds. What? They have accepted over 100 apprentices? Has Zero Wing's upper management lost their minds? Could a 3-star shop really be that powerful? The various guilds that had received this message were stunned. Normally, they would only recruit around 40 lifestyle players when they gained an additional 1-star shop. If they recruited any more, there wouldn't be enough workshops and resources to go around. After the candlelight trading firm upgraded one of its 2-star shop to 3-star status, the building had only gained 2 floors. Generally, it would be a miracle if they could recruit 200 players. Big Sis melancholic, should we raise the assessment bar? At this rate, we'll fill the new workshops. It will be a pity if we miss out on any talented newcomers later on, Cream Cocoa asked worriedly as she watched the thousands of people lined up outside of the building. Relax. I'm actually concerned that we won't be able to recruit enough people. Melancholic smiled bitterly. Not enough people? How is that possible? There are thousands of people outside right now. If we leave the bar at a 60% success rate, at least 400 or 500 of them should pass. How is that not enough people? Cream Cocoa was no longer the noob she had been when she had first started playing God's Domain. She knew that, although lifestyle players who could achieve a 60% success rate were rare, with the base number being so high, a frightening number of people could pass the assessment. 500 lifestyle players was not a small crowd. Even an ordinary second-rate guild could not afford to nurture so many. Furthermore, the candlelight trading firm was already saturated with lifestyle players. With the extra workshops that came with the 2 additional floor spaces, the most they could afford to recruit was around 300 lifestyle players. Any more and they would have to rent workshops from the lifestyle associations. However, renting workshops would massively burden their finances. 400 or 500 really isn't enough. The guild leader has already determined that we need to recruit 1,200 players, Melancholic Smile chuckled. With just the lifestyle players in front of us, we will probably won't reach that goal. Hopefully, more players will show up. Cream Cocoa was rendered speechless. Lifestyle players were only a small minority of the player population in God's Domain. In addition, the various guilds often held recruitment campaigns of their own. Gathering 1,200 qualified lifestyle players was a colossal task. Unfortunately, Cream Cocoa had another concern. Where were they going to house all of these lifestyle players? Elsewhere, Shifeng had completed his trade with Phoenix Rain in the City Hall and officially gained the deed to a plot of land in Lakeheart City. This is the information we have obtained on the Evil Dragon battle team. Take a look. The match is in 2 days. I look forward to the Azura battle team's performance, Phoenix Rain said, smiling pleasantly as she handed Shifeng the information she had collected on the enemy battle team and the time, venue and rules for the next battle. She was in a good mood after obtaining the 10,000 gold from Shifeng. Oh, the Miracle Guild. Shifeng was slightly surprised after a general glance through the information. We have only discovered this after the system upgrade, Phoenix Rain said solemnly. You mustn't underestimate the Miracle Guild. Although it is a super first-rate guild like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, Miracle's foundation is much stronger than ours. It can even contend with super guilds. When the time comes, the Evil Dragon Battle Team's roster will undergo a complete change. You best prepare for the match. Although Phoenix Rain had said as much, she did not think that the Azura Battle Team had any chance of winning. After all, the Azura Battle Team had exposed too many of its trump cards. The Miracle Guild would definitely come prepared. If Miracle went all out in this match, the Azura Battle Team would be overwhelmed. After all, the difference between each side's strength was immense. Phoenix Rain only prayed that the Miracle Guild would not take the match too seriously. This way, she could haul in another fortune. Shi Feng nodded silently in response to Phoenix Rain's advice. In truth, even without Phoenix Rain's warning, Shi Feng knew just how powerful the Miracle Guild was. In his previous life, when a Tier 3 mysterious flame had appeared in God's domain, the various large guilds had employed all sorts of methods to obtain it. In the end, however, a dozen or so experts from the Miracle Guild had secured the flame. Among the guild's experts that had fought for the mysterious flame, 2 other super guilds' top combatants had been present. That battle had become a classic within God's domain. To put it simply, defeating the Miracle Guild-led Evil Dragon Battle Team would be extremely difficult for the Azura Battle Team. As Shi Feng hurried towards the candlelight trading firm, a party of 6 arrived in the teleportation hall in White River City. The instant these players appeared, they became the main focus within the hall. Their equipment was too gorgeous to ignore. Even the lowest quality equipment was dark gold rank. As for these players' levels, that was even more impressive. Of the 6 players, 2 were level 40, while the remaining 4 were level 39. Even in an empire, this group would be a force to be reckoned with, much less White River City. So this is White River City? The standard of the players here is quite high. We're not here to sightsee, focus on the task at hand. Let's head over to Zero Wing to have a look. Chapter 913, Intermediate Shop. Chapter 913, Intermediate Shop. After these 6 players conversed among themselves, they left the teleportation hall and stepped onto the busy street as everyone watched. As soon as the group left the building, the leading white-haired, middle-aged man carrying a black and white spear summoned a giant snow-white wolf. The wolf was even larger than a lion. An assassin, wearing dark grey leather armor with 2 blood-red daggers hanging from his waist, summoned a black warhorse beside the middle-aged man. The warhorse sported silver armor and looked far more majestic than the horses NPC soldiers used. The instant these 2 mounts appeared, they had immediately attracted the attention of every player on the street. Damn, who are those people? Their mounts are definitely not common rank. You're right. I've never seen any common mounts that look that cool. At the very least, they should be bronze, maybe mysterious iron, mounts. To current players, even common mounts were a luxury, not to mention mounts ranked bronze or above. Hence, when the players on the street saw these mounts, both envy and admiration filled their hearts. Some beautiful female players even sent the white-haired man on the giant wolf flirtatious glances. Nowadays, God's domain was increasingly popular. One frequently saw the game mentioned in the news. Moreover, powerful guilds were offering annual salaries ranging from 500,000 credits to 6 million credits, depending on a player's strength. To ordinary people, this was an astronomical amount of money. Seeing as the white-haired man rode a bronze mount or greater at this stage of the game, his salary must have been in the 7-digit range. Ha ha ha. Boss Blood, I think those beauties are interested in you. An elementalist, who wore a robe embroidered with runic symbols and exuded a refined air, poked fun at the white-haired berserker leading his group. It's a pity that these beauties will never catch Boss Blood's eyes. After all, his heart already belongs to someone. Why won't these beauties look at me instead? A level 39 skinny, male swordsman said as he sighed. Masked, you really should learn a thing or two from the boss. If you put more effort into your improvement, you would have already reached level 40 and could amount to woo those beauties, the male assassin on the black mare snorted. How can I possibly compare to Boss Blood? Even now, I have not passed the test or obtained a title, unlike you, Kareen, who obtained your title half a year ago. the swordsman named Masked Angel said enviously. All right, that's enough chit-chat. Focus on our task. I will head to Zero Wing with Kirine. The rest of you, catch up with a carriage, the leading berserker named Bloodsucker ordered sternly. Immediately, everyone fell silent and did as they were told. The 4 level 39s rode an advanced horse carriage and followed Bloodsucker and Kirine towards Zero Wing's guild residence. Although the advanced horse carriage was fast, it was still slightly slower than the Snow White Wolf and Black Warhorse. As a result, the gap between the two groups gradually increased. The party caused a commotion everywhere they went. Meanwhile, the candlelight trading firm's entrance was overcrowded. Before anyone knew it, the candlelight trading firm had recruited over 300 lifestyle players. With this number, everyone could see how powerful the firm's foundations were. The other trading firms in Starmoon Kingdom could not compare to this. Guild leader, we've reached our recruitment limits for the moment. Any more and we'll have to send these people to the lifestyle associations, Melancholic Smile reported worriedly as she looked at the numerous files on the newcomers. 1,200 people, this was already beyond what the candlelight trading firm could handle. If they really recruited this many people, they would lose money each day, rather than make it. It's fine. Bring all of the information you have on the candlelight's branch shops, Shifeng instructed, waving his hand dismissively and chuckling. In God's domain, shops were officially categorized by star ranks. However, one could also categorize a shop by its size. Players in his previous life had realized his and summarized the differences. There were a total of 4 categories: basic shop, intermediate shop, advanced shop, and special shop. To begin with, 1-star and 2-star shops fell under the basic shop category. A basic shop could only accommodate a limited number of lifestyle players, and a firm had to rely on numbers to make up for the lack of space. A basic shop's assistance it could provide to lifestyle players was also quite limited. The intermediate shop category included 3-star shops to 5-star shops. In terms of size, intermediate shops were massively different than basic shops. As long as a shop reached 3-star status, it gained far more room than a 2-star shop. Hence, when the various guilds opened their own shops, while it was relatively easy to upgrade a 1-star shop to 2-star status, it was many times more difficult to upgrade a 2-star shop to a 3-star shop. Naturally, upgrading from an intermediate shop to an advanced shop was even more difficult. Meanwhile, the benefits an intermediate shop could provide became more obvious. The basic meditation room was a primary example. After Shifeng's command, Melancholic Smile compiled all of the information she had on every candlelight's branch shop and handed the files to Shifeng. Not only was the compiled information detailed, but it was also easy to understand. So far, the candlelight trading firm had a total of 25 shops. Among them, 24 were branch shops. These branch shops covered 22 cities. The fact that the firm had expanded so much was partly due to Phoenix Rain's secret assistance. Her help had allowed the candlelight trading firm to set up shops in the cities of a few neighboring countries. Moreover, she had only sold the shops to Shifeng at a price slightly higher than the initial cost. Phoenix Rain is certainly dedicated in her work. Shifeng smiled slightly after reading the information. Among the many shops, 6 were within the Black Dragon Empire. Moreover, 5 of these shops were in cities with a player population in the millions. In addition, there were 6 shops in the kingdom's neighboring Starmoon Kingdom. Among them, 4 were in the Purple Thorns Kingdom. All 4 of these shops were in the top 10 most populated cities in the kingdom. As for the remaining 2 branch shops, they were in the Twin Towers Kingdom. Unfortunately, most of the kingdom had fallen into ruin, and only the capital city remained standing. Shifeng had to admit that it was beneficial to cooperate with a major power. Without Phoenix Rain's help, Shifeng would have to exhaust himself to no end to achieve a similar result, and this would have greatly impacted his personal growth. Based on this alone, one could see how frightening the foundations of God's domain's major powers were. Currently, Zero Wing's advantage only lay in the fact that it had a lot of liquid funds. However, this did not mean that the game's major powers were poorer than Zero Wing. Rather, these powers reinvested most of the money they earned into valuable lands. Although Zero Wing had a lot of money on hand, it didn't have anywhere to invest. In terms of capital turnover, the difference between Zero Wing and these major powers was obvious at a glance. I will have to thank Phoenix Rain. I would have had a hard time using up these 5 slots otherwise. Shifeng then chose 5 branch shops and upgraded them to 2-star shops. When upgrading these shops to 2-star status, he saved far more money by using the special rights of a 3-star shop than when he had used a promotion order. Each shop only cost 600 gold to upgrade. With this, he only needed to spend 3,000 gold to obtain 5 2-star shops. Meanwhile, of the 5 shops Shifeng chose, 3 were in the Black Dragon Empire, with one of them in Lakeheart City. As for the remaining 2 slots, he used one on a shop in the Purple Thorns Kingdom, and the other on the shop in the Twin Towers Kingdom's capital. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,